All right, we'll go ahead and jump in. There may be a little bit of audio lag, so bear with me if we have some disconnect issues, but we'll go ahead and jump in. So, first off, welcome everyone to the space tonight. I will be Missileman, your host, and I'm excited to introduce our guest, Richard Dell, lifelong experiencer whose journey has taken him from private industry, government, to academia with a significant amount of firsthand experience living this phenomenon for decades. He's also the author of a recent memoir called Forgotten Unity, available on Amazon, chronicling not only his personal encounters and experiences, but his interaction with fairly high profile figures in the UFO and UAP world who've helped shape kind of the modern conversation that we have in spaces and on UFOX. So tonight we're going to go rather free form, first hearing his conversation in his own words and exploring the perspectives he's gained from a lifetime of direct experience, digging into some of the relationships and insights that have stood out along the way. But after our conversation, we'll open it up to just a free form Q&A so you can bring your own questions. And with that, Richard, if you'd like to jump in and introduce yourself.
Well, first of all, Jack, I want to thank you for the opportunity because, the sequel to the book has lain on the dust heap for a long time. And actually, looking at the things that you were interested in, I ended up writing about 11 pages worth of responses, which will be extremely helpful. I think we're actually writing the sequel. So I think you may have lit a fire. Thank you very much.
I look forward to seeing it. I've actually spoken to a handful of people around here who have already picked up your book, and in fact, were already familiar with your story before I even mentioned it. So, is there anything you'd like to tell the group about your background and how you got into this before I kick it off with some direct questions?
Uh, well, actually, go ahead, kick it off with some direct questions. I think your preamble has been sufficient.
Okay, terrific. So, we've known each other a long time. I think we're going to talk a bit about how you first got, exposed to the phenomenon. I mean, could you take us back to the very first experience that you can remember, and what stuck with you for it? Like, how long ago was that?
That would be July 16th, 1969. I was in the living room of a house in the very shadow of the Kennedy Space Center launch complex. I was, ironically, playing with plastic astronauts in a plastic Apollo rocket assembly, and I felt a presence hovering over me while I played there. I was pretty much oblivious to my parents on the porch. They were watching the Apollo 11 launch into history. 4 days later, I was bouncing with joy in my parents' bed just because I got to stay up late with mixed feelings, all indescribable. And, remember, I was only 4 years, 4 months, 4 days old. And it would be 43 years later that I would learn from my father that he had wired the black box communication system for Apollo 11, according to Dr. Werner von Braun's specifications. I knew that he had been U.S. Air Force counter intel, but I had no idea of just how well regarded he was and what he had actually done until 5 or 6 months before his mysterious death.
Tell us about what was your dad's career history like following the Air Force? How did he wind up working on the Apollo program?
Well, that would look to anyone like a conundrum. After he was brought back from Vietnam, where he had only been for barely a year, every day he had asked his commanding officer if he could go to the front, and every day his commanding officer would say, "No, Dick, you're the best electronics communication officer we have. You're staying." Well, eventually they send him home, and he works for Bendix. He continues to do work for NASA, contracting to Bendix. And I came to understand that he continued to do the work that he was doing for the U.S. Air Force on their behalf, even while he was at IBM, uh, which was extremely surprising to me. But then again, I got even more surprises a few months before he passed away. His background uh, in counterintelligence informed his business development specialties, his ability to understand strategy. For example, they sucked him up into headquarters and they said, here, you're going to spend a year in strategy. And a year in strategy back then in IBM was just you show up, you write strategy documents, and you get mentored. And then you mentor your replacement for a year. So one of the most astounding things that he said that has remained with me today is how he looked at business plans and how he was told to. For example, we provide one business plan, and his mentor said, uh, Dick, I want you to take that back and I want you to replace every word where you say problem with the word opportunity, and then reread it and resubmit it to me. That was Dick Dell, a believer in completed staff work, a believer in joint partnerships that could wield together the strengths and cover the weaknesses of a three-legged stool, meaning academia, business industry, and government at all different levels.
Now, when do you think he first became aware of the existence of a secret program to develop technology?
My suspicion is this. I've given this a good deal of thought, Jack, and I've got to tell you, when after the three deer mutilation incident that almost killed me, one of the biggest surprises that I got was finding out that my dad already knew Kit Green. In fact, he was having dinner with Kit Green's wife the night of the mutilation incident.
let's let's set the stage for the mutilation incident. I know this is a hell of a story, and I think it frames your firsthand experience with the phenomenon. What exactly happened?
Well, so two things happened simultaneously, like a perfect storm. One was that my father decided he was going to do, he had discovered about my training and background. He'd been using me as a consultant off and on for AVRC, which was nascent at that point. And he said he was going to do something he's always said he'd never do before. And what's that, Dad? Hire you. And he did. He hired me. And so I made these journeys from Charlottesville to Raleigh, doing consulting work. Basically, all the work I'd been trained to by Jerry, my mentor from the OSS, uh, and put all this stuff to good use. And what happened was about a month later, after it was firmly decided I was going to move in as his personal bodyguard, project manager, and basically wear all the other hats. And that was when I come back to my cabin. And this is in Virginia, rural Virginia, Fluvanna County. And just before I get back to Isolina Drive, there's a deer in the middle of the road, a dead half of a deer that looks like it had been placed there by some perverted taxidermist. I mean, the thing is sitting, with its hoofs up and erect, and it's a half of a deer. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness. So we slow the car. My friend gets out. He starts taking pictures. I start looking closely without touching anything, just trying to garner some forensic, evidence of what had happened here. We find, to begin with, this deer, like all the other two deer that we discovered, uh, looked like it had been freeze dried, and yet it had no condensation or moisture from the freeze drying process. The removal of all the main organs, but leaving the digestive tract, basically a thin vestige of peritoneum, was one thing. But to actually see how the skin had been peeled away around the rib cage, and the rib cage was entirely bare, denuded of all cytoplasm, as if it had been sitting in the sun for years. And the severing of the spinal cord was the most telling part of the whole incident, because there were no standard cauterization patterns whatsoever. And that meant that it couldn't have been done by laser. It had to have been done sonically. Well, I had previously been in the medical industry, and I can tell you that a sonic scalpel is half a ton, costs 500K, and that thing has to be on wheels to move that sucker around. That's just to get a 1/8 of a cut. This was cutting straight through the spinal cord. Now, there
And
was
you're out here
one,
in the middle of the woods as well, right?
oh, yeah, this is on a country road. This is on a country road. And uh, there was complete desanguination of all three deer. The other two were all in geomagnetic line north to south, approximately 3 meters apart. One in the just before the tree line, and the other actually in the bush. And I'll get back to that because there's something bizarre about that too. But there was one drop of blood about the size of a dollar, a silver dollar, on the road. Now, the only reason I know that is because, like an idiot, I didn't put on any gloves, touched the antler thinking, I don't see any blood. I don't see any evidence of any kind of anything. I'm just going to pick up the horn very carefully, the antler, and just get it off the road. We have something here. We have a significant discovery. People need to know about this. Something's going on here. As I touch the antler, I receive a static shock. Now, on a cold day, when you touch your car door, that's about maybe half a watt to a watt at most. But this was 7, 8, 9, 10 watts. And it was loud enough that my friend who's taking pictures of the other two deer says, "What was that?" There was a sharp static shock. I watched it. I watched it hit my finger. It hurt like the devil. And we'll have to footnote that and come back because I need to finish the forensics of the other two. Now, the otthe two, with these, there was a front half on the road. The half that was by the tree, near the tree line, was a rear half, but not the same half. It was rendered in exactly the same way, exactly the same way. But what's unique about the third one is not only was the rendering exactly identical, the sonic scalpel had been used to remove a tiny portion of the rib cage and an entire haunch. Now, with a sonic scalpel, 2005 or even now, no, I'm sorry. That's an extremely advanced sonic technology. It was as if something was saying, look, we can do very delicate work with the single tiny piece of the rib cage, and we can cut an entire haunch off. So the forensics completed. Now, here's the key part. By the time I gathered my stuff, my cabin, into my friend's car, and by the way, we did try to get those pictures off of his cell phone. We went to several different carriers and never were able to get them off. Tried several different methodologies. By the time the evening had come, I was feeling mighty strange. And I do mean mighty strange. I was thinking thoughts and experiencing those thoughts in a way that is impossible to relate. But what subsequently happened was that, and in retrospect, this is easy to understand. You're familiar with the Algernon effect?
I am.
Yes. Well, try to think about what that would be like to experience. Within a few hours, suddenly your IQ and other faculties of perception, we don't even have names for, are suddenly ramped up to a ridiculously high level. Now, I have had this conversation with several people before, and uh, lots of people like to talk about silly things like demonic possession and all that. But how is it that we never talk about angelic possession? Just a footnote thought. You see, I had a friend that came to visit me that evening, and I told him of things that I had been told, that I could feel the reality of, things that no one had ever told me. I depicted the entire timeline from 2005 to 2019, consummating with conquest of the United States by the Chinese as a function of the Fourth Reich. I did all this, and my friend just turned to me and he said, "Please go get professional help." And he ran away. But something had changed, Jack. When I did IQ tests when I got home back to Raleigh, the evidence was there. My IQ had been riding right around a nice, humble 130, 135, depending on what day I took the test. All of a sudden, it's riding at 170 for some tests, 180 or higher. And the things I was interested in suddenly changed. Things that I hadn't been interested or thought about or ever thought about were suddenly fascinating to me. Advanced physics that I'd never even thought to dabble in. I'm no scientist, I have a scientific mind, but other things too, such as history. Meanwhile, something is going wrong with my body because by the time I get back to Raleigh, I can feel it through every bit of my being. And in the subsequent days and weeks, I rapidly lost weight and showed evidence of both radiation poisoning and heavy metal poisoning, neither of which were actually present, just the symptoms. And every part of my body was clearly breaking down rapidly. I mean, I'm serious now. I've been doing Kundalini yoga since I was, I think, 32 or earlier. No, actually 28. And I have a great perception of the body, and I could feel everything deteriorating. Well, in the midst of this, something, a voice without sound, starts talking to me. Clearly a multiple presence, not a singular presence, but a multiple presence speaking in singular. In the Middle Ages, someone would have said, angels talk to me. For myself, what I was convinced of initially was this is a syndrome, a function of the neurological breakdown that must be going on. I mean, I looked like I was in Auschwitz, from Auschwitz within 2 weeks. I did everything I could. Kundalini yoga, jogging 8 miles, eating like a horse, eating mistletoe, live green mistletoe. I did everything and I prayed like a monk. And meanwhile, something is occupying my time talking to me and telling me things that, frankly, were utterly strange and yet sounded, and sometimes later proved to be absolutely 101% true. I recovered. I recovered around March of 2006. The deer incident happened on November 30th, 2005. By 2006, I was feeling healthy enough that I indulged a sense of playfulness with this apparent syndrome and asked it if it could help me to find out who did that to those deer and who tried to kill me. The response was the entanglement response that they were waiting for. They were waiting for me to be well enough to ask the question, who did that to me? Why? And their answer, though less cryptic than most of their answers, was very pragmatic indeed. They said, go on your internet, go and load a browser. Load into that browser the following terms: UFO, animal mutilation, journalist. It will lead you to fish and fowl. And that was it. That was all. That was all that they offered there. So I went ahead and did it. Again, I was in a skeptical mind frame, but I'm going to indulge this phenomena, whether it's a phenomena that's a syndrome of my recent neurological impairment or something else. I'm going to indulge it. And I did. And that search immediately took me to a man named, well, I forget what he was called in the book. I don't think he would actually mind if I used his name. He was a good brother. Um, we'll just say that his name is Greg for now. And Greg was a part of a triumvirate that was evaluating people to come on and join the world's largest tent. Have you ever heard of the world's largest tent?
No. So, you know that. How did you come upon him? How did you find him?
The world's largest tent is a list that has no server. People just copy and paste a huge number of emails. These people included Kissinger, Woolsey, journalists, all kinds of people, all racketeered by a man named Jack Sephardi. Jack gave me the audience that the patrons wanted. The patrons wanted to set off a quantum spark, a flare, they called it. And the flare was to tell this story on the world's largest tent. And then do what? Nothing. Wait. Well, I did. And right about the same time, uh, Admiral James Woolsey was giving a talk at the McKimmon Center, and he was to be a keynote speaker. My father was to introduce him. And in the interim, I got to have a private conversation with him. And much to my surprise, what he said had to have had something to do with the email that I had posted to the world's largest tent, because he said, "Oh, you're interested in hydrogen. You know, I've heard of this company called Blacklight Power. The process, well, you know, the company got started by some retired CIA execs. You know, there's a rumor that they probably used reverse engineered technology, alien technology. He did use the word alien, to stretch or bend one of the laws of physics, resulting in a little bit of hydrogen, but a bunch of power and a bunch of black light." Well, you know, the old admiral was one of my dad's role models, and I idolized him a bit too. But you know, I was like, the man winked at me. Come on, I'm not dense. I took a look. I talked to one of the two professors that had done the diligence initially back at that date on Blacklight Power. And we had a great conversation. The guy's was up in New Jersey. He was extremely helpful. And I said, "Well, thank you very much. I appreciate this. I'm gonna compare these notes to the notes that I get from the next conversation with the second scientist." He said, "What second scientist?" And I said, "Well, the one in North Carolina. There are two scientists here that have done diligence." And he said, "Oh, he passed away recently." Bang. Okay, enough of that. But the result was that when Sarfati started mouthing off about Woolsey, and I came, basically, I defended his honor. I said he didn't recommend Blacklight Power. He recommended I look into them. And I'm going to do that for every possible intriguing advanced technology that could help my species evolve. I'm committed to that. Well, I got kicked off the list, and it didn't bother me one bit. But what it did was this: a single email came from John Peterson of the Arlington Institute, 3 letters, THX. Thanks. That started a conversation with John. And basically enough, much like I didn't know that my father had known Kit, my father had known John. So John and I went up to dine with him, to visit, to talk. You know, clearly he was very interested in something, something else, not just the stories of how this all worked. He was interested in something else. But I ended up. This was very much the coaching of this patron phenomena. I ended up asking him, recruiting him to be the chairman for the management advisory board for the Advanced Aerospace Resource Center. Aerospace, uh, not Advanced Vehicle Research Center, but Advanced Aerospace Resource Center. And he was most enthusiastic. And he is the one who decided, well, if we're really going to do this, Richard, we're going to bring in Hal Puthoff. I had the most amazing conversation. The first conversation with Hal clearly set in my mind why the patrons were so interested in him and Kit. Because you see, in that conversation, Hal said, what I like so much about what you propose doing is this. You know, the child, the person, the young person that grows up in a cornfield in Illinois has an incredible, they share an incredible bond with the one that grows up in the ghetto in LA. They've both had their frontier stolen from them, and they instinctively feel it when they look up at the sky. Bang.
Interesting way of looking at the world. When was that you first met Hal Puthoff?
Oh, I met him shortly thereafter. Uh, we, uh, we had the most marvelous conversation in his car coming back from the Austin airport. He said, I share with him some writings that I've never shared with anyone uh, ever since, just for him, some things from the patrons. And he said, so I see you're a fan of Enki. And I said, yes, I am a fan of Enki. I wish I knew much more about Enki. Just mythopoetically fascinated by him. And he said, oh, that's great. I'm a fan of Enki too. And he pulls out of the back of his car the book, The Lost Tablets of Enki. And says, I read a little bit of this every day to stay connected with our roots. And I do too now. And so does my daughter. And several people actually that I'm not alone. Many people have actually read that book and it changed their life. But so we continued talking, and Hal was very interested in everything that the patients had to say. And at this point, I'm thinking to myself, if this really is a bizarre neurological syndrome, there something else may be going on. Well, this was the most interesting thing of all, you see, because when the patrons basically at some point, uh, 2000, late 2007, they basically said, you're pretty hot right now. We're going to withdraw. And I said, it was the only time I've ever been arrogant with them. I've always been, who knows if they're real. I mean, you need all the help you can get. But I said, I want proof. If you are who you really seem to be, you know that humans, we are made of clay and water. And over time, this will seem like a dream to me. Is there not something you can give me that I could hold on to as proof that you are real? And they said, what? And I said, I want to know what the boys in Brazil fly around in. I want to see diagrams. I want to understand how they work. Bang. 2 diagrams, eidically beamed into my head. I sketched them immediately. And before they disappeared, I said, will Hal be interested in this? I mean, this seems quite substantial. And I got the telepathic equivalent of laughter, which, by the way, is very unsettling. They said, no. The last thing they said to me, very last thing, was, no, not for another 6 months. And they laughed and they were gone. 6 months later, Hal calls me to Austin. Something had dropped into his lap that was not in his bailiwick. And he wanted to see if my father and I would give him a hand. Oh, fantastic. Road trip on my way. And wow, what a briefing I got. What a briefing I got. I mean, I got the first half hour of all the good stuff that everyone knows about. He showed me some file cabinets full of marvelous things. Then when he was done, he clearly had finished his presentation and said, now it's time for us to talk about cabbages and kings. He walks off to his desk, and I'm sitting there at the conference desk, staring at his credenza. It has one thing on it and one thing only. And I'm looking at it, and I feel the presence of the phenomena, if you want to call it, the patrons, as I call them. And when Hal comes back and sits down, he says, what's going on? I said, they want you to tell me about that. He says, really? Well, that's exactly why I asked you here. I told him about the two diagrams. I didn't have them with me. I totally forgot them. And he said, did the diagrams look like this? He opens the paper, the seminal paper that Dr. George Miley did when he first created the star mode in an IEC, when he first showed its propulsive capabilities. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, laying the first step in the helicon injection of an IEC for marvelous deep space missions with everything you would possibly want. Wow. That experience led me to believe it's possible this is not a syndrome of a neurological condition suffered years ago. But I'll tell you what, Jack, nothing in the world changes what you have seen with your own eyes after you had a long time to think about it. And these beings didn't just open a gateway to a man's technology that could solve world hunger, world drought, and take us to the stars. No, not just that. On 2009, November 26, 4:44 p.m., there they were, waiting for me. They didn't fly in from anywhere. They didn't appear. They were waiting for me. I'd spent the whole day after Thanksgiving, working on a feasibility study for an energy program. And there they were when I was done. Did my security check, walked out to the truck. There they were, two beautiful, rose-colored. I mean, the color, okay? Some of you know what I mean when I say the color. A
And this is
rose
at the
color.
AVRC plant, right?
Hmm?
This is at
What?
the AVRC plant. Is that right?
Yes, that was at 500 Stinson Drive, Danville, by God, Virginia, 4:44 p.m., November 26, 2009. Two 20-foot diameter rose-colored spheres, less than 120 feet away, less than 120 feet from the ground. I should have said something profound, but all I could say was, well, will you look at that? I reached without looking away from them for the binoculars in my truck, as if I could see any detail. I mean, they're right there. Oh, there was also a thin, beautiful golden layer of light, thin layer of light around, making it look like it could be just a circle of light, right? Oh no. When I put those binoculars in place and put the focus in, almost immediately, a thin lip of invisibility began to move slowly across the surface of what had to be a sphere. And when it was done, this was no Star Trek deal. This was, watch this carefully. 17 seconds, a demonstration of cloaking. And then I'm excitedly move my binoculars to look at the other one. And as if on cue, it begins to do the same thing. And when they were done, I had been given a gift like no other. The second most important moment in my life after my daughter was born was this, was this, was this final proof.
And do you think that those vehicles were operating with the technology from the diagrams that were beamed into your brain used by the, I think you said boys in Brazil. I take it you're referring to surviving Nazi reverse engineered UFO technology.
I think it's unfair to refer to them with the pejorative term of Nazi. I I do know what you're talking about, and I do want to say that I think that the German situation was far more complex than anyone dreamed of.
But these are surviving expats in Brazil who operated the vehicles based on the diagrams that you had seen.
Oh, those diagrams clearly, one shows how the engine works, and the other one shows how that engine fits into the spaceship carapace. And based on everything that I saw and all the experience that would end up coming to me later, I must say, what a marvelous design. This is the design that was utilized in the previous century. Who knows what any of the Germans or the Fourth Reich have been able to achieve since then? with these types of plasma technology. They've had decades to work on them, which brings us, of course, to the Fourth Reich's master cult, the Zodiac. You and I have talked before about conversations with Kit, and the most devastating one, the most life-changing one, was the one 2 weeks after my father passed away, when he chose to say, the day before my birthday, he chose to say, Richard, I want to know if you have any reason to believe anyone would want to kill your father. To which, you're on an unsecured line, anyone could hear. Well, you know what? He's a hobbit of a man. This is the man that taught me the value of John 3:16. This is a credible man. This is a hero. As Kit put it, Big Dell is a stand-up guy. And if Kit Green says someone's a stand-up guy, you know he is. Well, the conversation, he basically, once I answered that question and said, no, I know of no one that would want to kill my father. Yeah, he said, I'm going to tell you some things and I'm never going to want to talk about them again. He said, and by the way, this was shortly after they discovered another aerospace executive less than 30 miles away at Wake Forest that had died from the same mysterious symptoms. Kit said, you know, I have spent a great deal of my life and most of my professional career on busting cults. There's one cult I have never busted, and that is the master cult called the Zodiac. It lives in the basement of the Pentagon and has been there for a long time. He did not say 80 years, but 80 years appears to be where it started. He then said, this master cult has the following characteristics. It hates advanced technologies, hates is a horrible word. Hates advanced technologies, hates even more advanced energy technologies, and hates most of all advanced propulsion technologies. Well, it's an easy jump to understand why. The Occam's razor, because they have them. This master cult has cultivated other cults and maneuvers through all the various branches, 13 branches of society segments. It has spent almost a century infiltrating not just churches and academia and businesses, not just saturating the energy utilities with its assets, but also maneuvering and machinating other cults, murder cults, all sorts of cults that will do their bidding. And their bidding is profoundly evil. Judge them by their fruits. What else could I tell you, Jack, about the Zodiac?
Well, it sounds like the story of your exposure to the Zodiac and the Fourth Reich really began with insights from Kit. So, what's the history of your meeting and getting to know Kit and gaining his trust and being initiated into this knowledge?
Well, that happened when Kit basically told me the other reason for his call on March 15th. A consortium in Langley had been called to examine the forensic evidence of my father's demise. You see, Jack, when he passed, he scared the tar out of every neurologist in this hemisphere. Because Jacob Crutchfield or any other kind of prion kills within 1 to 2 years of the first display of central nervous system symptoms. 1 to 2 years. Dad was dead in 3 months. Scared the hell out of the foremost neurologists in the eastern hemisphere, in the eastern coast. The consortium in Langley Kit said he had been authorized by the chair of the consortium. We'll call him Dr. Kitch. Dr. Kitch said, Richard, to tell you that your father did not die of a prion. Okay.
Had
But
he
what did
examined
kill
him
him?
while he was ill?
I'm sorry?
Had Kit examined him while he was ill?
Kit was the Johnny on the spot the minute that my father was doing some of these things that if you've never been around someone that had kuru or any mad cow disease, any form of prion, you can't imagine what it's like to watch them suffer this way when you love them. I mean, it was one of the highest forms of torture. I was this man's bodyguard. I was his son. I became his program manager. I reached out to Kit after I'm watching my father. I've been driving around for a good couple of weeks because these symptoms keep coming and going, where he starts playing with imaginary aerospace uh, controls and drifts off in these bizarre trances. He'll have a conversation, and all of a sudden he shudders like the typical kuru or mad cow shudder. And all of a sudden he's picking up a conversation from where we were 10 minutes ago, 5 minutes ago, half an hour ago, yesterday. It didn't matter. It was like he was phasing in and out of time. Man had a massive intellect. To actually watch him suffer this way and degrade this way was, I can't even put it into words. But Kit was there through the whole thing, and when he called the night before Dad passed away, he said, "Don't give up hope." And I said, "Kid, he's already dead." So,
So your father had been ill for about 3 months when Kit said, when he said, "Do you have any reason to believe anybody would want your dad dead?" He'd been ill for quite some time by then.
at that point, it had been about 3 months and 6 weeks after uh, basically I would call him up and he would tell me things that he had spoken of with some of the neurologists. I was really using him to try to ferret out what these people were telling me, to try to really figure out what was going on. Um, the case of Dick Dell still remains open. I mean, it's
And so to line this up in timeline, we were talking about the first experience with the mutilated deer was late 2005 2006. I think you became acquainted with Hal in about 2008. Is that right?
actually no. I got acquainted with Hal uh, I think it was April. Yeah, I think things had progressed that by April, John basically said, "Yeah, let's go ahead and get together." Um, and that was when the Arlington Institute was still in Arlington.
Oh,
Um,
John Peterson set that up.
yes, yes, yes. He
Okay.
was the one who introduced me to Hal. Uh, so he was the reason why the patrons had sent off that flare, the world's largest tent. They had wanted me to get to him so he would bring Hal, and apparently in the near future, 2 years later, bring George Miley. Uh,
And when you were interacting with Hal and showing him the diagrams that had been channeled to you by the patrons, and he introduced you to George Miley. What were you made aware of the DIRDs being compiled for OSAP at the time, or did you become aware of that late in later years?
Later years, much later years. What my primary dance with Kit was to try to figure out two things, and I'll never be satisfied on either of them. Unfortunately, one is the demise of my father, and the other is the second time I had a significant, long, life changing conversation with Kit, and that was in 2014. You see, I was worried that I might be experiencing some of the symptoms, and I've been doing too much reading on Jacob Crutchfield, the genetic form of the disorder, thinking myself, how could the Zodiac have done this? We were reconstructing apart from Kit, because he was looking to China. We were reconstructing something else, but meanwhile, while this is all going on, Kit finally asked that same neurologist that had worked with Dad to go ahead and do an MRI. When he found out they did the MRI, he asked him to do a second time. And this guy, he's an expert in the field. I mean, he's like just under Kit in terms of gravitas in the neurological field. And he says, I don't understand. Your MRI looks fine. Why is he ordering a high contrast MRI? In other words, Kit was looking for something, Jack. He was looking for something. Well, what he was looking for, I came to find out, he calls me up and he says, it's probably time for us to, at some point, we'll talk more about this, but it's probably time to let you know that you have nothing to worry about as far as what may or may not have killed your father, may or may not kill you. You have no worries of that based on the MRI. However, based on the high contrast MRI, you do have a non pathological anatomical variation to the topology of your brain that I've only seen in one other person. The person I came to find out was his star RVer. Um, and I won't say anything more about him or her, because who knows how many of us there are. Basically, what he told me was and I ended up looking at the MRI myself. Oh my God, yeah, it's there. It's a kielbasa-sized third lobe. It sits below and in between the two main hemispheres of the brain and runs like a highway from the rear parts of the hardwired brain to the front parts of the hardwired brain. Yeah.
Now, the way that Kit was describing this to you, do you have the feeling that you were born with this alteration, or that it was a product of one of your experiences?
Hey, I'll tell you what, I thank sweet Jesus that finally someone told me why my whole life I had felt so different from everyone else. My hat's off to him. I mean, I owe Hal and Kit more than I could tell you in all the stories of all the things that happened. I mean, Kit has helped me Kit has helped me out of places where clearly the Zodiac was getting ready to strike. Uh, you were asking about the earlier about the second time that I talked to Kit. I actually went up to Wayne Medical University because I wanted some answers. I wanted to know more about this third lobe. I wanted to know more about this other person. Not to expose anything, or just to understand, because what is going on here? And one of the things that kept coming up in my mind was the mark that was on my mom's arm when she woke up the morning of December 1st. My dad and her both sketched it for me. I sketched it for Kit. And by the way, I did end up finding out that there were 440 other women that had a similar symbol appear and disappear for 3 days. And yet, Kit said, he could find no appropriate genetic markers.
Was this
Nevertheless,
following your dad's illness, or prior to that the mark appeared on your mother?
oh, this was the night of the deer mutilation incident. Yeah, yeah, it happened the night of the deer mutilation incident. Now, so I'm headed up to Wayne Medical. I want to talk about this third lobe, but Kit's body double shows up, and that's cool. The last time that I quote unquote met with Kit, I met with his body double, but this time there were, I think there was some miscommunication because I show up, he shows up, he's in a smock, he's running the part. I mean, this guy's a pro. Kit doesn't work with anyone but professionals, and he guides me impromptu into a basement conference room. And I'm there thinking, I want to talk about this third lobe, and I want to get into this, but that's not what he was there for, Jack. He was not there for that. He was there to tell me more about, without telling me more about the Zodiac. And here's what he shared with me. He said that he had been attempting to figure out with other people. There was a little coterie of people that were really trying to figure out what was the nature, the quiddity of the largest black ops program in the United States. What was it about? What were they planning? Apparently, he claimed they managed to track down a CFO, former chief financial officer, of this. Well, I'm not sure it was all the whole program or just one segment of it. And they said, would you tell us what they are planning? And she said, absolutely not. If I did, they would kill my family in front of me. And then he turns to me and he says, do you know what they're planning, Richard? And I got to tell you, I he looked confused because what I did was I utilized some of the training those angels or patrons gave me. I delayed my thymic response because think about this for a minute. What did this man just do to me? What he did is he asked me a question that if I answered responsibly, I I was less than 2 years away from losing my mother and father, and I had a living daughter to protect. What are you offering? What protection? I didn't say this, but this is my immediate thought. And I'm delaying my thalamic pause because, as you can tell, it would have gotten me hot under the collar to really think this through and respond in a way that I'm responding now to you. And that is no protections, no, nothing. What are you offering in exchange for this to someone who's already lost half their family? Uh, I, the, you know, I was coached on what to do if such a thing would ever happen. I laughed. I laughed maniacally, and I said, "Second wave." And I left it there while he was confused, trying to figure out because this guy's good. He's good. Like I said, he only works with the best. He says uh, something along the lines of, trying to follow, trying to do, he's about to try not to look dissembling. At which point, I immediately told him the parable of the Archaeopteryx, which had been explained to me by the patrons, and which made all the sense in the world about this third lobe. The parable was quite simple. Did the first Archaeopteryx know that it was the first Archaeopteryx? And I asked him that. So I didn't answer his question. Whether I do or don't know what they're planning, obviously I'd never admit to that in this forum or any other, if so or not. But the fact that they want so badly to know what the Fourth Reich and the Zodiac have been doing, because this is, you remember, the Zodiac master cult is like a combination SS and DARPA of the Fourth Reich. I am convinced that they are allied in ways I wouldn't want to discuss in detail with beings that probably are not human, and that most of, I'll tell you what, 3 days out of the week, I think the cons lead are right. They're just demons. The other side, the grays, the other couple days, I think not. But one thing is for sure, there are two sides. One side is in support of humanity and its evolution, and one side is not. And it is just that simple. Dress it up however you like.
What did you when did you first become aware that Kit was using body doubles, or did he confirm this to you, or did you get it from maybe Hal, or how did you learn that?
uh, no confirmation needed. Um, there are lots of pictures of Kit on the web, and you can see him through much of his history, and see the basic facial patterns and so on and so forth. This would be like a version of Kit that was He-Man, 30 years younger, flowing long godly hair like he was Zeus or Thor. Incredible physique that suggested he had significant special ops background, and don't start a fight with this guy. His demeanor, though, was so beautifully Christ-like. I've always felt like I was with a brother, not necessarily that, uh, a brother that I knew, but a brother who was pursuing the same goals for humanity that I was. I had that respect for him, but my God, man, there's no way in the world I could have I've mistaken him for Kid. Only from a distance, someone watching from a window taking photographs, and then they'd wonder why Kid had grown his hair out so much. He really did look like he was from He-Man, Galaxy Quest or something. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Going back to the good evil binary with the NHI and the alliance between the malevolent side and the Fourth Reich master cult, have in your experiences with the entities you refer to as the patrons, was it always clear that you were interacting with benevolent beings, or did you also have psychic experiences with malevolent beings, and did you ever feel like they were trying to trick you? Was there trickery involved in the signaling or the messaging, or how have you experienced that?
So the funny thing about it is I've had a good 20 years to read about other people's experiences, and the funny thing I take away is just how unique mine was in terms of, yes, it did show a picture of hell, it did show a picture of heaven, but the picture that it showed of heaven was so compelling and wonderful, not in a way to trance you, but in a way to align with your core shared values. If you basically keep an awakened mind and a heart full of gratitude to the creator, you're in good company you can't see. Have you ever heard of the prophecy of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the second war of gods and men?
I don't know details. Go on.
So the Essenes, the ones that gave birth and raised Yahshua ben Yosef, they actually they taught many things. They taught about the grays. They called them archons. Described them exceedingly well. Really, you can make no other consideration. But they spoke of the first war of gods and men being different from the second war of gods and men, and that this in the second war of gods and men in the future, the both sides men would not know that they were fighting alongside the gods, whereas in the first war they did. Again, these were the people that raised Yahashua ben Yosef. Most of us call Jesus Christ. So I think their view is, to me, perhaps the greatest. You asked me once, what was the greatest surprise in all this? Wow, finding out that whether they're NHI or not, which I don't think they are, I just don't think they're not human. I think there's too much. I've felt too much love, and I just maybe I'm so paranoid that I only trust people by their fruits. Their fruits are the fruits by which we could use to raise a billion people, a billion families out of slavery, out of poverty and hunger.
So you think it's
That
possible the benevolent patrons are human consciousnesses, like human spirits or humans from the future? Is that what you're thinking?
the pet theory that I've used as the mosaic template to compare all other mosaics or thought experiments usually runs this way. They can only really be one thing because our understanding of what mm, our understanding what an angel, or as the Aramaic original term messenger, would mean to us versus someone from 2,000 years ago is very different. But in this case, the experience was nothing was ever foisted upon me. I was never told to do anything, but I was told about what would happen if I made a different choice. That, that to me, guiding someone to find the one thing that could raise a billion families out of poverty, out of hunger, solve world drought, and take us to the stars. Wow, that's that's beautiful. That is absolutely beautiful. So you can't say, okay, these folks are angels. Okay, but when you start to really look at some of the details, having lived through almost several years of sharing space with these folks, there is one thing for sure. They are reverent to the creator. They have no illusions or naivete about the other side. And they do believe that what happened in Golgotha 2,000 years ago was more beautiful than anyone will ever understand. They referred to it as a quantum bridge, and they said it had everything to do with the ones we call the little gray guys, the other stakeholders. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, you asked me once, what's the lens through which I look through all this now? I do look through it through the continued experience of finding everything the patrons told me was for a reason and a good reason. I think that they're from the future, Jack. I think they're from the future. Oh, they are angelic, but they're from the future.
So to map this all, we've laid out sort of the historiography of your experience with the phenomenon and every angle of it, and we've touched a little bit on uh, the aspects of the program that you have run into or bumped up against. How do you map this onto the modern UAP political conversation we see going on with mainstream disclosure figures like Lou Elizondo and David Grush, and in your view, who is a part of the machinations, and what agendas are authentic versus what agendas are part of a darker motivation in terms of laying it out against your experiences?
Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I think that the mapping that I would do would actually be specifically tying to one instant. I have one beautiful anecdote. There's many, but there's this one beautiful anecdote that must be heard to be appreciated, and that's this. When after Hal and John and I have had lots of conversations, we've both gone to Austin. I went to Austin alone. Then we go up to the Arlington Institute. Then we're at the Arlington Institute a second time, and the desires of what Hal wanted to do with me and what John wanted to do with me were very different. But there we were in the lunchroom banquet hall underneath the where the Arlington Institute's offices were. And then at some point, we're sitting there with Ken, John's aide de camp. I think he was probably loaned from NSA, but uh, he loaned from someone. That guy was super competent, super on Johnny on the spot. But he's sitting there while we're having lunch, and Hal is sitting to my left, just to my left. John's sitting kind of catty corner in the front. Ken's to my right, and then John Peterson says, after we talked about some really, some pie in the sky things for the Advanced Aerospace Resource Center, John pauses for a minute and then says, "You know, I have a friend, a vice admiral that fished a mile-wide UFO out of the Pacific. Do you think I should put us in touch with him?" Bang. Hal gets big dinner plate eyes. He looks at me and he says, "Well, that's an interesting idea. What do you think, Richard?" And my response was, "Well, I will admit this. At the time, I was experiencing superfluence. So they were there watching, ready to try to ameliorate if I made a mistake, made a bad choice." I said, "Absolutely, absolutely. When can we talk to him? When can we talk to him?" uh, I'm thinking to myself, this could be referring back to what the patrons had said. They said you had to be very careful with Jason because of his. They called him Jason, Jason of the Golden Fleece. Even they knew that the Golden Fleece would never happen, but they understood the irony of the concept. They might have had hopes, but I had hopes that John would do something other than introduce me to Hal, which was lovely, but that John would do something that this could be the beginning of. I mean, people like to say that the secret sauce is in a special black box and a black box and a black box and a black box, and nothing but an act of God will release it. Now, of course, my first response is, well, who's to say that God might not decide to do exactly that? But this was a possibility that, maybe we could help things along. Nothing came of it, Jack. Nothing came of it, and John never raised a cent for us. And I went up and there were several times I went up and spent time talking with him at his little ranch up in Berkeley Springs. And one of the times that I decided to myself, this is the last time I'm going because, as my father put it, once you know who John Peterson really is, you won't like him very much. I go up there one last time and I asked John, I said, John, why didn't you do anything? I mean, it was great to introduce me to Hal, and we got George, and we're finding what all the difficulties are with commercialization of this technology, and that someone actually doesn't like it, doesn't want it to be commercialized. There's a witch hunt for George of the Dewey. Why haven't you raised a penny for us, John? And his response, Jack, was telling. His response was, because we are trying, we've been trying these last couple of years to figure out if you're really working with the little gray guys, Richard. Oh, if I had been prone, if I had had the inclination to take anything personally, I would have called this man who was former, de facto DNI for both Reagan and Clinton. I would have said, "What a fool you are! That I would work with the beings that tried to kill me." That's what I
So,
wanted to do.
so you were convinced at this point, and has your perspective changed that the Greys were the malevolent force behind the contact incident with the deer?
What are the best simulacrum I could put together that takes nothing but the science, and then does not disavour throughout the baby in the bathwash, taking into consideration the comments made by the patrons. There is an almost inescapable conclusion, that the scourge, the other side, the other stakeholders, were responsible for the attempt on my life, and that was, in fact, the means by which the patrons could use quantum entanglement to create some unique connection, to provide me with not just support, to raise my IQ, to increase my chances of survivability in the face of a truly near lethal weapon. Uh, I'm sorry, I've lost track of the question. Did that
No,
answer?
that's all right. Yeah, I was thinking about as we try to imagine what Peterson's role is, where he lives on the spectrum of good versus evil, where to whom he is allied in this organizational structure. When he makes that comment, he is clearly placing himself opposed to the Greys, and he is intimating to you that you and he are on the same side. And I'm curious what you have thought of that over the years.
Well, it intimated that there was still in their minds the possibility that I wasn't on the
Well,
side of
well, well,
humanity.
sure. Well, sure. I should say that he was making no secret of the fact that he saw the Greys, or his interests saw them as the other guy, as the opposition. And I'm wondering if you've considered, or if you considered since, that you could trust that or not coming from him.
Yeah, and you know what? I suspect that the only reason that I could trust that from him is because of the desperation that he feels about the fact that he made, at the very best, he made bad decisions involving the human race and the citizens of the Republic. But at the very worst, Jack, he's culpable of Padrion, treachery to his own species, to his own
That's
kind.
great. You told me that you're convinced he's the Axelrod character.
They yes, yes, I am. And in fact, one conversation I had back in 2012 with Kit sounded amazed when I suggested to him that, uh, well, I mean, here's how the whole thing worked. You're familiar with Ingo Swann, right?
Yep, as many here are. Yeah, for sure.
So basically, one day when I'm driving with my father to a meeting a meeting with Charlie Rose, former congressman, Democratic warhorse, the Democratic Party. We're going to meet with him to get some assistance and some negotiations. And ironically, Hal calls me up and says, "Would you do me a favor? Would you ask? I heard through the grapevine that you're going to be talking with Charlie Rose. Would you ask him if he would tell me by any chance who Axelrod was?" And I pursued Charlie, a little bit because Charlie was Hal's friend, and for good reason. Hal was Charlie's friend, and he finally comes back. He says, "I wanted you to know I haven't forgotten you, Richard. I am going to talk to Ingo." He said I've got to go up there and have lunch with him. And he said he would tell me who who Axelrod really was, and it never happened. And fast forward to sitting on the porch of John's ranch den house. Uh, John says, "Well, that's really amusing, Richard. Why wouldn't Hal ask me? I go up to have lunch with Ingo once a month." And that's when I felt the superfluence of the patrons who were basically saying, "See, this is Axelrod. Noted well. Remember him well."
Did you have any exposure to the Arlington Institute event that Hal put off just recently started discussing publicly in the last couple of years, the think tank activity?
Yeah, we had talked about that before. How it was sort of a just a kind of assumed thing in the conversations that Hal and I had. At the time, the conversation was with Hal was, one half things that the patrons were telling me that they were totally cool with me telling Hal, um, and things that Hal was interested in pursuing with his Advanced Aerospace Resource Center. He had really given it some thought. And by the way, my father and I are the industrialists that Lou Elizondo referred to in his book Imminent. We were the ones in Raleigh that Hal was talking to. And by the way, I did see the conversation that was had where John Peterson basically said to Lou, uh, you know, I've been in this business long enough to know someone is telling you to go do this. Who is it? Um, uh, and that too tells you a lot, because one of the first things John ever said to me was, "I've never been in the military, Richard, but I've been surrounded by military my whole life, and I'm not involved with military really anymore because I wasn't able to change it." And I told my dad. He said, "Oh my lord, what consummate arrogance! When you find out who John Pearson really is, you won't like him very much." John
So,
was in
so
a position to do so. And by the way, I once went on a road trip with an NSA lieutenant colonel who asked me at some point, uh, it was a long road trip to the Omega Institute. She asked me if what I knew, because John Pearson basically stepped down, disappeared at the pinnacle of his career, at the top of his game. Why? Well, you know what? I decided just for fun. Never talked to him or her since then. But just for fun, I decided to go ahead and just give the unexpurgated opinion of the patrons, which was that John John had seen in his career real evil, and was attempting to ameliorate the best way he could the evil that he witnessed and did nothing about, to get to that immense pinnacle of his career. Somehow, he had sacrificed a piece of his humanity that he would never get back. And that's why he stepped down.
You mentioned that there was a conversation between Lou Elizondo and John Peterson. So I may have missed it. Is there a reference to that in Imminent, or are you aware of them being acquainted?
Oh no, that wasn't an imminent. That was a conversation that actually happened between John and Lou. I believe it was face to face, but if you do a little research, you'll probably find out. Um, I'm not connected to the world's largest tent anymore, so what I get has some static to the signal.
Well, one reason that I believe you is that the first time I met Lou for face to face, after briefing him on my technical background, the thing he said, which I don't think I've ever said publicly, was, "I need to introduce you to Kit Green." And if I had never heard Lou say that, I might not have been prepared to believe that he was acquainted with John Peterson. So that's interesting.
Well, there you go. There you go. So, I'll tell you what. Here's another story about John Peterson that I think is loaded with things to try to understand. John, you know that John tried many times to figure out how to work with Ingo, and Ingo was just amused by it all. But you know, I have to tell you how surprised I was that when he came, he actually hunted me down in the Panhandle of Virginia back in 2010 with a very, very specific purpose. There I was living in a trailer, running a energy center for the Wise County, basically a new joint venture, between academia, local government, and business development. And he hunts me down. He finds me and takes me out to dinner. And he says, "I want to ask you for something special, Richard." I say, "What, John?" "I want to ask you for a winning lottery ticket." Oh, oh, oh my. Uh, uh, John, it doesn't work that way. And immediately my mind is racing. And I'm thinking to myself, how the frick does he know? How? Who told him? Who
He
talked
meant
to him?
remote
Who
viewing
talked to him?
perspective. He
Well,
wanted to monetize your ability, was the notion.
because apparently this is a super spook. This is a retired super spook. This guy did some background on me back in back in 2003. I did something once. I'll never do it again, but I did it once because I did the purity of the request. A friend of mine who is mentioned in Forgotten Unity, that I was living with at the time, he wanted so badly to get a birthday gift for his sweetheart. And it was obvious these two were just meant for each other. And it was obvious he was not asking for a selfish desire. He said, "Can you give me a 4?" Ironically, I said, "All right, I'll give you 3 4s, or we're never doing this again." I gave him 3 4s. He won the prize money. He got Becky a lovely gift. And I never did it again. As I said, "John, you institute karma. You don't understand anything about karma at all, do you?" And I thought to myself, and the patrons are coaching me. They said, "Offer him a bone. Offer him a bone. Give him a bone. Come on, give him a bone." I thought to myself, "Oh, well, okay, here you go. Just being creative." I asked John, "John, are you familiar with Star Trek, the very first series?" And now, come on. You would think that someone that had been involved with Star Wars, the Star Wars program under Reagan and Clinton, would have been very familiar with at least the superficial jargon, would know who the frick Spock was. And when I realized he doesn't know anything about Star Trek, I start telling him about an episode from Star Trek. Do you know the one about the alternative universe where Spock wears that Manchu goatee?
Oh yeah, of course, mirror universe. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So I was trying to tell him about this episode, and finally I just said, "Look, I'll tell you what. I'll throw you a bone. There's no way in the world, in God's sweet world, that I'm going to give you a lottery ticket, winning lottery ticket number. What I will do is I think I'll make an offer. I want you to let the rulers of the world know that I'm willing to serve for a limited time as a liaison between them and the lords of the earth." And John said, he said, "I hope you're really serious about this, Richard." And he tells me the story of the people that I'm talking about. He said, "They're meaner than pit bulls." He said, "You've never met anyone like them. I know someone that worked with them for 5 years on a $5 billion project. He was going to get 5%. And when he comes to the meeting just before the closing, when there's cigars and brandy circulating and everybody's laughing, all of a sudden there's silence. And he turns around and he sees the old patron of the family say to him, 'Get out.'" And he's like, "What? Get out? I've worked for 5 years in this deal. I'm gonna make a percent. Get out." He was found the next day, strangled in his yacht. The suicide note was not even written in his handwriting. They're enormously sloppy. And so John says, "Richard, before we seriously make this offer, think about who you're talking to. These people are pit bulls. These people are worse than pit bulls." So I actually go home, and that night I had the weirdest lucid dream that I was struggling with an invisible, old, ancient man who was like, somehow there was something about him that reeked of the most incredible selfishness. This is, it reminded me of the time that John told me a story of when he tried to find the man, they said, who goes to sleep and wakes up and his dream changes the world. It almost felt like that, but I actually wouldn't even hear about that till sometime later. The next morning, we're at a banquet table very early in the morning. There's a family sitting way across the way in the banquet hall. And John says, "So I've given some thought to this, Richard. I'm actually really excited. I want to know how you want to proceed with this." And I said, "John, I am so sorry. I cannot do this. I must protect my daughter. You're right. Those people are worse than pit bulls." And he slams the table. Now, I've seen John Peterson's anger before, several times, come out. I mean, wicked. And he slams the table and he says, as he's getting himself back under control, seething, I mean, smoke coming out of his ears, he says, "Richard, your daughter, if you don't think that your daughter is protected by 1,000 angels, then you're not as smart as I thought you were." And that was the end of my relationship with John Peterson.
This feels like a good punctuation point to go to the audience. We've grown our audience, I think, larger than we were when we started. Are you good with going to questions, Richard?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Carry on.
terrific. Um, if you like, go ahead and start throwing your requests up. I've had a lot of questions come over DMs, and so I apologize I didn't get to all of them, but we'll just start taking Q&A. But I did catch something I was curious about, which is you mentioned that John wanted to use Ingo, and he couldn't get him to or was it considered difficult to work with Ingo, or did Ingo simply not want to weaponize his ability? I mean, what was the disagreement there?
I actually think it is reminiscent of a scene from K-Pax. Have you ever seen the movie K-Pax with Kevin Spacey?
I actually haven't seen it. No, I have not.
Uh, Boy, you got to watch that movie. It's a great movie. He plays an alien called Pro that's inhabiting a human nervous system, or at least you keep guessing to the very end whether or not he really is real or not until the very end, and then you realize that he is real. There's it reminds me of something that he said when they said, Can you show us how this light technology works, the means by which you traveled here? And he said, absolutely not. You would blow yourselves up or worse, someone else. Well, what this tells me is that much of the things that I heard at the very beginning of my contact and my experience having proved to be true is this. Any successful exploration of this solar system or anything else is going to happen only if we strive to be worthy, ask permission. We are Johnny come lately. We may have been around for a couple million years, and we may even be a Mobius species if what we're talking about is true about the future. But you see what where I'm headed with this. There are lots of people that have figured out ways that the earth could be utterly destroyed by some of the fruits of their technology. These are, by the way, the same people that have been joining our consortium quietly.
Do you think that opposition to exotic technology research comes from what you describe as the master cult, or do you think it comes from um, forces like John Peterson indicating they're worried about it being poached by the other side?
I think John knows a whole lot about the Fourth Reich, and that was yet another reason to step down at the pinnacle of his career. The Fourth Reich's capability to racketeer this civilization is extraordinary. I mean, we're talking about institutions that we love, institutions in law, institutions in academia, businesses. I actually had Kit repeatedly told me that assets were had been filling up the utility companies, power utility companies for a long time. I'll never forget when some middle management utility company employee of the consultant nature actually came to my door one morning and nearly busted it down, beat on it, and said repeatedly, "We know you have it. Eventually, we're going to get it back." And uh, when you have the capability to racketeer and to just have that kind of palette from all these areas, then you even add something that's even more sinister. If you're going to protect your secrets, then you racketeer murder cults, assassins. You see, what I had figured out was that my father had suffered a toxic syndrome from two sources simultaneously. One, from the nanotoxin that was introduced into his Afrin. He had tons of Afrin bottles in his office, at home, in his office, at work, at the AVRC, in his car. We believe that because his senior administrative assistant was, as Kit would outline, was a member of the oldest satanic coven on the East Coast. And she appears to have been the culprit that introduced the nanotoxin that worked with the unique spectrum being emitted from the smart meter attached to the wall, quite close to my father's headboard. So we're talking about a cult of assassins, and we're talking about capabilities they want to protect. The Zodiac is going to racketeer us. It is going to call the shots for the Fourth Reich. And I believe that what we're going to see is two sides beginning to surface because there is about to be so much struggling. It's not funny. You see, one of the things the kid told me the Zodiac prizes the most, and that we are, by the way, deliciously denying them, is the hunger for ultra secrecy. I mean, we know that they changed their name. who cares about the name? The things that they have changed are unique, and they are extremely adaptable and extremely responsive. Let me give you an example. The DMV in North Carolina, Virginia, they are what's called reciprocal in sharing databases. At some point after a toxic exposure that I suffered in 2014, March, I decided on my way back from Virginia uh, to check on the expiration of my license, which I believe was going to happen in another day or so, but I wanted to get confirmation of that. I went into the Virginia DMV. I walk up to the desk. The woman says, "How can I help you?" I say, "I need to check on this ID. Throw my ID down." And I didn't even realize, oh my God, I'm at DMV. I shouldn't be looking at her screen. And she goes, "Sir, please, no, you're not supposed to be looking at my screen." Oh, I'm sorry. I stand back. And then all of a sudden, she's motioning me over to look at her screen. And she says, "Yes, sir." She says in a quiet, whispery voice, "As you can see from this indicator, your North Carolina license is about to expire. But given these flags," and she points to these flags, uh, indicating something that I am not. And if you access the database on either side of Virginia or North Carolina, shared instantaneously won't matter. I've never been a state trooper undercover, never will be. I exalt state troopers and I idolize them because many of them kid has utilized to save my life. But I never have been an undercover state trooper. And those flags suggested I was an undercover state trooper for the North Carolina state government. The Zodiac can change data amazingly instantly, but they value their ultra secrecy so much they cover their tracks, both electronically and in the real world, in extraordinary fashion. That's why Kid has never busted them.
And this is an organization that, to go through the history of it, is meant to have been an iteration of Majestic 12. And you mentioned, we know the name has changed, that probably no longer known internally as Zodiac, but something else.
Lots of people have lots of different opinions about Majestic 12. I don't. I don't have a single opinion about it. What I do have is an opinion about what I've had experience with. And in my mind, if or not, there was a Majestic 12. And we know that there had to have been a think tank group like that because we've had enough leaks from enough honest people. So uh, I think where we are right now is if these leaks are true, then there has been significant think tanking. The special group was probably Dr. Edward Teller, who said some amazing things to how he said to me as well, to how how related to me that he had said. But uh, honestly, MJ12 as it's depicted in this uh, new media is just a tool for the Zodiac would eat them alive and probably racketeered them as well in helping them to make bad decisions on behalf of the civilization. They've been there for 80 years in the Pentagon.
Yeah, so in that light, I mean, what do you think of the theater of disclosure? Who do you see as an honest actor out of I've heard it suggested that there are some people who say that Lou Elizondo is playing a part in a choreographed release of information, but others have suggested that maybe David Grush was a fly in the ointment, that event was not prescribed. Do you have any opinions about that?
I'll tell you what, I sure do. It sure feels like that's the case. Like Grush was serious fly in the ointment, and we don't know uh, how many threats on his life there have been. But Lou, as John pointed out, in this case, John's right. Lou's working for someone, and you just don't say, okay, oh my god, it's a sinister agenda. No, what is this? My father used to put it repeatedly to me like this. He said, Richard, the problem we're seeing is that the Air Force has painted itself into a corner with almost no way to get itself out. But there are an awful lot of smart people, men and women in the Air Force, that have been working to try to figure out how to get the Air Force out of the corner it's painted itself in. Does that make sense? So in other words, nothing. Lou's doing a good job. Lou's doing the job he's being paid to do with our tax dollars. And who is to say whether or not his agenda is pure or not? Because he's just doing a job. And you have to kind of, let's put it this way. A couple of months before Dad died, and when he told me about the black box communication system we wired, I said, Dad, why didn't you tell me? Dr. Werner von Braun was like a role model, an idol. And he said, because it's classified, son. And a lot of people take that so seriously, which is why Teller said the worst thing that's confronting us. This is the guy that knew the Greys were an existential threat to our existence. He's the one that told Hal the thing that is keeping us from winning this war is the sequestering and overclassification of all this information. How do we get the Air Force out of a corner? Maybe Space Force, Semper Supra, maybe not. But someone's been trying to for a while. And I don't think that's a bad thing to try to unpaint the Air Force out of guard, because there's some good people who've done some good work.
So you're saying Ed Teller and Hal had a conversation about the threat posed by NHI, and it was Teller's opinion that like that long ago that there was an overclassification.
One thing is real clear once you've been operating and you're paying attention. The reason why Teller worked like a man possessed till the day he died is because he was one of this, whatever you want to call it. You want to say it was MJ12, or the think tank, the supreme think tank that was being racketeered by the Zodiac and Fourth Reich. Teller was incredibly aware of the detailed existential nature of the threat, and the threat being absolutely horrible. And so he worked hard every day. And what he told how our greatest barrier to success is the over compartmentalization of all these discoveries. This is what right now what is actually hurting us the most in our struggle against them.
And what there's a lot of villainization of the private sector and black aerospace companies in this conversation. I mean, when we have um, debates about the grand production of all of this, where who exactly the quote unquote bad guys are, as if it's a binary. But in you haven't said much about private contractors in terms of the senior, extremely well trusted elite of, let's say, Lockheed, Northrop, Boeing, Raytheon, etc. Where do you see their agenda, and are they an asset to humanity in this process, or a liability?
Oh, they're simply the gatekeepers of the black box, the black box, the black box. And so you could go ahead and say, oh, they're totally sinister. And unfortunately, without oversimplification, this is not to say that Lockheed Martin isn't one of the finest assets the Zodiac has, after China. But the fact of the matter is that there's some good people in these companies that were seeded with the technologies of the Greys. There are some good people, and they have been trying to figure out. Many of them have probably wrestled with their conscience more times than one. And I am talking about the 4,000 people that don't exist, that go out to the White Sands on a plane that doesn't exist. Okay, we all know what they're working on. It is to the benefit of the survival of the human race. But here's the thing: is that while they've been doing this for all these great reasons, guess who benefits the whole way. And why would the Zodiac ever assassinate a scientist pumping out IP when they can just assassinate the business developer trying to help them?
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point. There's a lot of lore and a lot of speculation about alternate energy scientists who have been disappeared or killed or harassed. But at the end of the day, not very many of them have access to capital and have access to business managers. And so, as a matter of fact, I think a standout example of that and an exception to that rule would be Amy Eskridge, in fact, because she had her dad and her dad's legacy as an asset, and they founded the Institute for Exotic Science. Not to say that I have no idea what the truth of that scenario was, but you make a good point that there are soft power applications that can come into play to suppress and keep things from happening. It doesn't have to be assassination.
Right, right, exactly. Like, for example, getting into the data of a laboratory and messing with the data in just a fine enough way to throw off its results. These people are ingenious, and they've had 80 years to put together their plan, and they've had all the money in the world to put it together. So here's the thing: to get back to your earlier question about the contractors, consider their conundrum. On one side, a Zodiac that says, "Don't you dare let anything out of that black box and a black box and a black box," and then on the other side, oh, politicians and citizens and anyone that could sue us. So they're sandwiched between the Zodiac master death murder cult and an army of lawyers. How could they not be the gatekeepers? They're in the ideal position at this point from the Zodiac's perspective.
You know, there was that post I just made a few days ago, drawing attention to the interview that happened a while ago, where Trump was being interviewed by some woman, and she asked about the New Jersey drone slash UAP appearances, and he started to say, "It's not up to me." Wasn't that something?
Uh, yeah, you see, we're going to continue to see the edges of the veil start to fray in places like that because what's happening is the the powers that be, best to just go ahead and call them that. Okay, there could be lots of names with all kinds of unusual slants that send us off in different directions, but whoever they are is output the powers that be. They have their script and they want to follow that script because they truly believe, rightly or wrongly, that this is the best script for humanity. Well, some of us might disagree with this order and this master cult. And we may do that worst thing that, when people normally do it, you run the other way. But we may lump people into two groups: accelerationists and decelerationist. Do you want to go forward or do you want to keep us retarded? It starts to boil down to that simple thing. And there are an awful lot of people that would really prefer to not be painted a corner and not have to keep lying to keep themselves out of jail and their family from getting killed. Is that putting it simply enough?
How many public facing officials that we see take part in the UAP conversation, on stage, so to speak, like Eric Burleson and Marco Rubio and Gates, and how many of those people find themselves in the same conundrum as the private contractors that you mentioned? How many of them, much to their shock and perhaps disappointment, get read in and find themselves trapped? Do you think that that's a fraction of those, none of those, many of them? What's your thought on that?
All of them. The Zodiac is very competent. All of them.
But do you think that very many of them are? So, for instance, if we take on premise that Trump was saying, "Oh, it's not up to me," that he was in fact saying that because he had had a conversation with someone who said, "It's not up to you. You can't tell." If he was told, bald faced, um, this is not up to you, that's a hell of a thing to say to a narcissist. And I wonder if there are softer ways to keep people in check than allowing them to understand there's this giant secret that they're not allowed to spill. Do you see what I'm saying? Is layers of deception. Do you think those are often used against politicians?
Yes, and I've seen it. I've witnessed it. That is a prime modality for keeping the sheep in the right court and keeping them out of places that they shouldn't go. They want to control the narrative. They wish they could carry out some of the original parts of the plan that were put together probably at the founding of the Zodiac. And I think someone put, I can't say who, and you know, I've known plenty of people retired from Boeing Fan Works and Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, but I can't say who it was. But there was someone that uh, suggested that what's what's going to happen is they really, really want to do their fake alien invasion. But the situation up there is so much more complicated than the original plan called for.
I frankly think a blue beam scenario sounds really risky from the executor's perspective. I don't think it sounds like the greatest plan in the world to achieve some kind of military state or covert rule. I mean, it's kind of your ultimate trump card. I mean, you don't really know what the world looks like on the other side of that. For a moment, I'd like to welcome Wagaboss, my good friend, up to the co-host seat. Wag's gonna assist with some questions while we take more speakers, but go ahead.
Hey, what's up? I just had a quick question for you. So I'm always trying to think of like intent, motive, capabilities. Because kind of like when you read a book, you're trying to think of like, okay, I'm reading this book, I'm getting the perspective from a third person, first person, an omniscient narrator, and so I try and use that to inform how I think about NHI and stuff like that. Are they omnipotent, kind of like the narrator from a book where they know all, see all, do everything, or are they kind of more lowly and earthly, so to speak, as us, in the heaven versus here on Earth sense? Um, you had stated that these aliens made an attempt on your life at some point. What year was that attempt on your life? And then, thinking about a human example with like Osama bin Laden, he did an attack in 2001, and we hunted him until I believe like 2010 or 11 when we eventually got him. How do you think why they would make an attempt on your life and then not follow up on it?
So my suspicion is what we're dealing with here are two super intelligences, both possibly guided by advanced AI, the kind of AI that would require one to calculate, do the quantum calculations required to entangle a conduit into someone else's weapon. So you asked when it was the date. The date was November 30th, 2005. You might want to take note that November 30th is the first day of the 2-week period when the sun is in a focus, serpent handler. So the incident, both of the entanglement and the contact with the patrons, happened subsequent to the attack itself. But here's the thing, something that's important, not just to tell you what I believe happened, but to add to it again. And gentlemen, I can't mention, deceased from one of these programs. When I told him the story and I told him about the spark, his immediate response was, "Ah, that's when they went into you." Put chills up my spine. And got me to really thinking. And that was, again, just before the the cloaking demonstration in 2009. So it was previous to that. But do you see what I'm getting at here?
Do you I kind of at least sorry, I'm driving here, so it's a little hard to hear sometimes when audio breaks out, but uh, do you think one of the factions might have marked you as a protected individual, and when they came to make the attack on your life, it was kind of like Harry Potter, where his mother cast an enchantment on him to protect him in the future or something like that, and then that's why he survived the initial attack by Voldemort. It was because he had that protection. So do you think one faction was giving you favor?
So if I'm correct in the informed opinion from what I've seen, what I've heard, what I had a chance to think about, the answer is this. It really does appear to be that someone didn't want the Greys assassinating anyone in their special line or genome. In other words, what I'm telling you here is what I'm seeing is a possibility that there are among us numerous mutations that were made in vitro to sponsor changes, beneficial changes to the human genome, and that someone did not want someone to mess with one of those lines. And someone apparently has been messing with about 400 of these lines because there were 400 women that received the mark. So, yes, it does look like we're talking about something that's probably time travelers. They are probably from the future. They are very human. They're very compassionate. Uh, and the other side, which is intent on their program, which is pretty much akin to Star Trek: The Borg. That's probably a good stab in the right direction. Because these things you realize are not. It's not of them. These little gray guys. It's not of them. It's an it. It's one of the oldest, most advanced quantum AIs in the universe. And so, well, of course, with that kind of advanced technology, they're going to tinker wherever they like through the million years of history. And someone, it looks like, is intent on curating their own past. They probably look a whole lot like us, and they're not aliens. And whatever that other side is, it's more alien to humanity than we could possibly imagine or would want to. Go ahead, Walk.
Awesome, thank you. And then that was one of my favorite ways to conceptualize how would you explain our situation if we're just being observed. Is that one of my fun sci-fi theories would be is that we are a seed vault like Svalbard, where it's this frozen island off the coast of Norway where they have a vault buried underground where they keep all the different seeds for plants known across the world.
Yeah.
And in the event of a nuclear war, they would be able to repopulate the Earth with flora and fauna, or just flora, I guess. That existed before the nuclear winter. So that's kind of an interesting way to think about us here on Earth. Are we someone's seed vault for the original strain, the ancestor strain of what they are now? Diminutive, smaller humans, maybe grays, and then we're just the in situ backup drive of what they used to be, and they might just keep it around to look at it like a zoo. But my other question would be is when you mentioned Kit Green had body doubles, was that like a conventional human that just so happened to look like him, kind of like a dictator might have here on Earth, or do you believe that to be like a clone of him in the sense of, like a true body double?
Oh no,
like a copy.
no. He wasn't a true body double. Kid is a slight man. This fella was built like special ops. And to best of my knowledge, Kid's never had a flowing mane, although he might have in college. I don't know. When he was studying in the seminary, being an Episcopalian priest. I don't know, but
Interesting.
yeah.
So it's kind of like descriptions of the same person that didn't match. It's
Oh,
like, hey, what does Kit Green look like? Oh, he's jacked and he's got a mullet, and the other guy's like, no, he's got a buzz cut and
mullet.
he
It was a
looks
mane.
like hungry.
It was a mane. It wasn't a mullet. It was a mane. I mean, you know, I was envious. I had better hair than I did. But
Hey, nothing wrong with the mullet. That's a mane to me.
I think the important thing was that, you know, anyone that was basically just going off of simple electronic surveillance would have seen his heat signature and mine. We sat at the airport in Raleigh and had a long discussion just after Dad had passed. You know, eventually, he was the same body double that I met 2 years later. You know, they would end up telling me after I was forced to give an enigmatic, cryptic response to his query. You know, what do you know what they're up to? He said, "I wanted to remind you of something, Richard. I'm a law enforcement officer like you've never met." I took that to heart. And there were some times where his hidden hand was helped me to safety. I don't know how many times he saved my skin, but he was sending a message. And a lot of people say, "Oh, body double, how sinister." No, not at all. I mean, come on, kid's got a family, all right, and anyone who wants to try to bust a master cult, okay. And by the way, did you know that about him? And in his early career, he wanted to be an Episcopalian priest.
I didn't. No.
No, I did not. That's one of those names where I'm kind of new to ufology within the past 2-3 years. So all the names is just hard to keep up. But I definitely have heard Kit Green before, and I just keep adding to the Rolodex all the different references people make.
Oh, that's cool. Hey, we should take a question from UFO Sarah and Courtney.
Awesome. Thanks for answering my questions. Go
Oh,
ahead,
you're so
Sarah.
welcome, Mark.
Yeah, thanks so much, Missileman. Fantastic. Richard, it's great to be in the space with you. I wanted to, Philip Corso Jr., Philip Corso Sr.'s son, once stated that this isn't about a UFO cover up, that it's about a time travel cover up. And I heard you briefly talk about that. And my question to you is, um, what is that true from your perspective, from what you've heard? And if so, do you know of any instance, or is there any way you can hint at the fact that quite possibly our history has been, within the past 100 years, might have been changed? Thank you.
You're welcome. So, are you familiar with the Lost Tablets of Enki?
I've heard that. I'm not familiar though.
So, what I want to do is suggest to you that it's very easy to find a PDF of this book. The story I'm going to tell you is from this book. The story is, as far as I'm concerned, I actually spent a good deal of my young adult life trying to hunt down, any kind of indication that there had been time travelers, and time travelers that were unable or were not supposed to stay hidden. And found some interesting ones, 888 AD, the Shining One in Wales, and so on and so forth. But none is as fascinating as the Lost Tablets of Enki and the story it tells of a man, Anunnaki, named Galzu, which means great knower in their language. He shows up right about the time just before the flood, and no one recognizes him. He comes with the ring and the bearing and the MEs of the plenipotentate of the Emperor Anu. Though no one knew that Anu had a plenipotentate, but it didn't matter. It all checked out. And he basically gave them a lie. He lied to them. He told them specifically this lie to keep them around to watch what was about to happen. And the lie was, you cannot go back to your home planet of Nibiru. You have to stay on Earth because you've lived too long here. So has spun things in your body. You will die a sooner death than later if you return to Nibiru. And it was a lie. It wasn't true at all. But it did keep them there to witness what happened. And at the time, Lord Enlil, who was calling the shots in the vacuum with no Anu, basically said, okay, well, that's it. Flood's coming. This will take care of this misbegotten experiment. We will be done and we will be good. You know, don't you tell anything to the Adipites. Don't you tell them about a flood. Don't you tell them anything. Well, Gazu leaves, and about, I think, 2 weeks later or something like that, Lord Enki wakes up from a dream in which he spoke with Galzu. And Galzu said, don't be angry with your brother, Lord Enlil, because he has a part to play in this too. Here, take this tablet, these tablets here, made of lapis lazuli. Take them to your son, Jashudra. And don't talk to him, but talk to the wall of reeds that is around him. And say, oh, wall of reeds, there is a great flood coming. But if you will just build this ark on these stones I am leaving for you, wall of reeds, you and your family will be safe. And Lord Enki takes off. The rest is history. Yasudra builds the ark. He's one of several groups, actually, that did survive, including about 36 children of Cain, according to the tablets of Enki. And the end result is they do stay. They do see what's happening. And by the way, Jashudra was the very first Adipite that looked like the Anunnaki. Oh, at that point, Adipites were all different colors: black, brown, yellow, red, but none with skin that was pale, eyes the color of the sky, or hair the color of flax, like Lord Enki. Jashudra was the first hybrid child born that looked like him. He wanted him to survive. He did, him and his family. Lord Enlil grew incredibly angry that this had all happened and was about to tear Lord Enki, his brother, apart. When they come to realize that there's a difference between destiny and fate. And they subsequently discover when Emperor Anu shows up and tells them, I don't have a plenipotentate. There is one line in there that makes sense to me, because he said to Lady Nimersa, Galzu did, he said, don't you recognize me? We went to school together. But she didn't recognize him. And that, more significant than anything else that he wrought, suggests to me he was a time traveler. I think also that the Comte de Saint-Germain was also a time traveler. Courtney, you got a question.
Oh, I have a whole host of questions, but it's a good segue that you're talking about Gilgamesh. I wanted to ask you about his time out in the Enki, out in the wilderness, because one of my favorite parts of his story is he's out in the wilderness and, he's living off berries and leaves and whatnot. And there's this one distinctive part that I remember about Gilgamesh where he shows his comeliness to some woman who he encounters out in, his travels. And it's just a funny part of it that I've always remembered. And I can't remember the woman's name, but that wasn't my question. I just wanted to bring that up to you because I've always found that hilarious. It's kind of like the Gilgamesh erotic scene. Anyway, for listeners who follow Enki, it's a nice little throwback to his experience in the wilderness. I have a couple questions. First of all, thanks, Jack. This has just been such a great space, so compelling, so many touchstones being hit on for people who follow all the history. I mean, so many new pieces of information for folks who are following all these stories for so long. I had to pull off. I'm on my way down to Thermopolis, Wyoming, from Montana, and I had to stop so I don't lose cell service on my last 80 miles here because it's so compelling, and I wanted to get a question in. So one, you're familiar with Ingo's work and, his book, Penetration, about the trip to Alaska and Axelrod and all of that, which I think is totally fascinating. And you've brought up some new bits of information for those of us who are so hungry for any kind of information about Ingo's work. I just had to ask you, since you gave us some teasers about Axelrod, did you ever run into the twins in any of your adventures? Because they were prominent in that book. You talked about Kit having a body double. It made me think of the twins. That's my first question. Then the second question, which you already kind of synchronistically answered organically, you mentioned a hidden hand. You've covered a bunch of other things I wanted to ask questions about, but the hidden hand, this has been talked about by a lot of different experiencers who do feel that protective element, whatever you want to call it. Many of us have been harassed, stalked, cyber stalked in real life. For whatever reason, it's kind of a mystery, but it still does happen. And I always validate it when I hear it's happening for people. I wanted to ask you about the hidden hand, and you mentioned it, so you recognize that it exists. How has that hidden hand come through for you personally in your adventures and your encounters with all these different people? And what would you recommend for people going forward who are kind of dealing with those elements, the darker elements, to get through it, to pass through it?
I actually would like to address your very last question first, because I think it's one of the most important. Because there's, of all the things that I'm grateful for the reminder of how to be human. And it's going to become so much more important than we realize. My advice, though, typically is this: you have two great tools in addition to your free agency. You have a awakened mind, and you have a compassionate heart. You understand that wisdom is the heart of compassion. Compassion is the heart of wisdom. Once you start that, you'll never go back. Whether you are one of those people that is always ready to let their religion get in the way of their spirituality or not, or one of those people that there's just no disagreement anymore, it doesn't really matter, and it's not that relevant. Fact of the matter is, we have two different words for two different concepts, very different from two different civilizations. Spiritus from the Latin for breath, aka cognate prana, or the other, religio, Greek, to link back, a synonym for culture or tradition. But a spiritual experience isn't about tradition. All the masters and mistresses, all the fathers and mothers, they've all pointed to the same way. And again, an awakened mind and a compassionate heart will keep you human. And staying human is the most important thing of all to do right now. Whether you are a religious person or whether you're a spiritual person or not. We all have had to acknowledge the spiritual dimension. Some of us are ready to own it. Some of us aren't. And they have a different path. When they have to adhere, they have to lean to their own understanding. And that's okay. We'll help those folks too, because they've been traumatized by this as well, as much as us. I hope that answers your question. We got a question from Electron.
Hey everyone, great space, Missile, as always. My question kind of dovetails off of the last question regarding time travel and the phenomena. In your opinion, which model of the universe, the block model, deterministic, multiverse, ancestor simulation, or perhaps another, best explains or facilitates this ability? And how does that align with your notion of the hidden hand? Thank you.
First, what I want to do is, you're welcome. First, what I want to do is this. Tell me, first of all, what you think the hidden hand is. And then I'll tell you what I think it is. Electron, you there?
I'm going to reserve my opinion. I wanted to hear you since you're the speaker, the guest.
How many hidden hands are there? When someone says the hidden hand, it seems to relate, well then, if there are two crossed swords or the future of our species, which one of those hands are we going to watch the closest? Which one of those hands are we going to keep closest to us? That's why I ask what you think the hidden hand is. One One time I was sitting in John's den with Hal, and Hal asked me the question, why do you think that the globalist bankers know more about what's going on than all the intelligence agencies of the world? Certainly, one of the things they may know, and they may not like it at all. That's what I've gotten from much of this over the years. So if we were talking about the hidden hand, you're talking about what my friends call the lords of the earth or the masters of the world. The masters of the world are so helpless. They know so little, and they do know so much more than the intelligence agencies of the world. If that's what we're going to call the hidden hand, and I say that is a very weak bear. The president, when you got the leader of the free world saying it's not my call. Guess what? There's more than one hidden hand. And believe me, they are watching every move. I think you asked a question earlier about time travel. The model of the block right now is very popular for good reasons. Because if starting with that, no matter where you end with your theoretical thought exercise, you're probably going to get somewhere in the neighborhood of what we're looking at. Now, I have to tell you, I'm going to go ahead and this is not a shameless plug, by the way, for a science fiction book that I wrote, but I wrote the book specifically to contain the incredible narrative that was actually given to me in the process of a toxic exposure when the Zodiac was racketeering me in early 2015. They dosed me with a combination of BZ, I think it's JS116, a couple other things. I think the kids call it permatripping. At any rate, I hallucinated for an entire month, during which time I put myself to good use, stayed in my room and concentrated on physics problems and game theory, so on and so forth. But at the same time, that entire month, the entire time, I was experiencing a movie. The only time the movie stopped is when I closed my eyes. The movie is quite credible. I made many notes. The basic scenario is one that seems very believable. That if the space-time barrier gets bent, not broken, but bent in a way that we understand fully, there will inevitably rise two factions. One faction that will want to curate their past, and another faction that will want to challenge it. I suspect that time-space barrier was bent some time ago by our species, and that this is what your hidden hand wants most to hide.
Okay, yes, I agree with you 100% on that. And that's why I wanted to refrain from my definition of hidden hand. What date or what era would you put that bending took place, in your opinion?
At what point, in what era did what take place?
Did that bending of the space-time barrier, when did you think that occurred?
I can only speak of a suspicion. I can only speak of a suspicion and a gut instinct, which I can't attribute to anything other than the marvelous faculties given to me by Creator. And that feeling is that it did happen in 2015. It did happen about 10 years ago. Someone struck back at the Zodiac at the Fourth Reich significantly back in 2010. Are you familiar with the earthquake that happened simultaneously in Colorado and Virginia?
Yes, I was in Colorado at that time.
How about that? I was in Virginia at that time, in Danville. And do you recall that the U.S. government survey immediately revised their findings on both simultaneous earthquakes that had identical ratings on the Richter and also an identical pattern of seismic dimensions that suggested it was not an earthquake. It did not have the standard curve for an earthquake. It had the bell curve of an atomic bomb. I believe that both cities, the twin cities of the Fourth Reich, were struck by our side, the side that wants humanity to exist, to continue, to evolve, not the side that wants a few survivors in their nasty little bunkers to decide what will become of the human race. I think this is offensive to the lords of the world, the masters of the earth. Sorry, not the lords of the world.
So 2010, 2014 is kind of the time that you're giving it,
I
in your
really,
opinion?
like I said, my gut instinct is that happened in 2015.
Okay.
I think it's somehow it is connected. I just don't know how to that strike against the Fourth Reich.
Last question. Then I'll drop back down. Have you ever heard of, or have you ever been exposed to what is called the Army of Northern Virginia?
The Army of Northern Virginia. Help
Yes.
me. I do not have unfailing knowledge of this thing.
Allegedly, they're a subset of Task Force Orange.
Huh.
Does that ring any bells?
No, but you have to remember that the most ultra secretive machinations of the Zodiac, the handling of these precious gems that just poop out of the sky, is their second highest after ultra secrecy. So who knows how many recovery teams and how many different separated special access programs are operating. I haven't heard of one in Northern Virginia, but I'm not surprised. I mean, anywhere close to Wildcat Ridge, where the entrance to the major dome is up in that area. I don't know if you're familiar, but there's a ginormous one under Wildcat Ridge. I suspect that's probably where they drag quite a few of the things that they recover, because there's a lot of traffic in that nexus between Virginia, West Virginia, Tennessee, and North Carolina. Having lived there, talk to the people that have lived there all their life. Good Lord, those people see alien fleets and bizarre things all year long.
Well, Richard, thank you so much for coming. I'm not closing it out yet, but I did want to tell everyone I've had about a dozen people scream at me for not setting it to record. I swear to God I did. And as soon as I started it and I noticed it said live, so I was told there's a way to resurrect the audio from my Twitter archive and then post it. So I'll be doing that. So don't worry if you missed some of the beginning. I will find a way to put it up live, but yeah, we'll just keep going.
That's hilarious, by the way, Jack. You know why? This is only the second time I've done an interview. The first time, the recording disappeared off his archive.
Who was the what was the it was an interview here on X?
Yeah, really nice fellow. I'm trying to remember his name. I think it's John, the fellow that sells candles. He's just a lovely man. But yeah, we did an interview. It wasn't nearly as in depth as this one, and I think I was also a little bit more reticent in that interview than this one. So I hope it is recorded.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and resurrect it. So, talk to me about the sequel to Forgotten Unity, or perhaps we should call it Volume 2. Where do you see yourself going with that story? What did you did you not get around to in Volume 1?
Oh, well, things like, about the third lobe in my brain, the bizarreness of the interactions with Kit. And actually, I did want to utilize some of the materials of a private study that I did, unfunded by anyone, just because, well, I was in that phase of my life where I was tempted to try to turn into Batman, but what I really wanted to do is I wanted to understand. I wanted to understand more fully how this master cult operates. So part of my process was attempting to utilize my skills at infiltration that I'd been taught by Jerry, old spycraft, to see how far I could get. And it ended up being more like an episode of Forrest Gump, amateur cult buster. Um, uh, I learned a lot more than I ever could have wanted to know about, for example, the Jubilo Juggalos. Uh, their their development and the rapid expansion of their membership. Baltimore is like capital city for them now, and in the sequel to Forgotten Unity, which I'm tentatively calling Unity Scorned, I explored some of my experiences. They tried to kill me more than once, and in one time was quite extraordinary. But um, I wanted to get some of that in there. But here's the problem: as you're writing it, you're thinking, um, who's going to be that interested in this? Oh, um, maybe some law enforcement. I already disseminated all my notes to Kit, and whatever he chose to get the law enforcement was up to him. But what I saw really left me with quite an impression. It's probably been about, let's see, it's been about 7 years since the last time they tried to kill me. It was in Henrico. And that was a hell of an experience. That was the experience that I told you about that resulted in Kid eventually sending a message to me at the hospital where I was staying that unicorns are sometimes real, Richard.
This was the
Um,
experience that was like a hyperdose of a dissociative or a hallucinogenic.
oh, no, this wasn't the toxic exposure of March 2015. This was 2018 in October. And this is when Kit barely managed to get me out of Raleigh to a bus station where basically Kit managed to get me onto a bus in Raleigh that was filled. If you've ever gotten onto a bus and had this experience, tell me, but I don't know anyone that has. When I got onto the bus, there was a woman, the same woman that had dosed me at the bar when I asked for water, had given me something that I'm not sure what it was, sodium something or other. But I ended up getting a message from Kit through a director at a homeless center who showed me a map to the bus station, the Greyhound station, said, "This is the only homeless shelter now that could take you. They're all full. You need to get there as soon as possible. If you go down that road right there, you'll get to it." The girl that had been at the bar, the bartender, there she was. And she goaded me into continuing to the bus station. She said, "You need to get to a bus station right now." And at the bus station, I simply walk onto a bus. I don't have a ticket or anything. I walk onto the bus. The bus is completely full except for two seats. One all the way in the back, one all the way in the middle. And before I can sit down or interact with anyone, I noticed that I am literally the only white guy on the bus. Every possible color, culture, ethnicity, it was astounding. The demographic mix that was on that bus. Only two seats empty. When I went back to the very back of the bus, a lovely Hispanic man said, "No, you're not supposed to sit here, man. You're supposed to sit up there in the middle seat." Well, the middle seat was a retired naval special ops guy. We had a marvelous conversation, but before the whole trip started, the girl that had racketeered me at the bar and given me the sodium, whatever it was telling their security that I had a gun. And the security guy looked very sad. He said, "Oh, go ahead, just empty your pockets." He said, "Look, he didn't have a gun. You get back on the bus, son." Spent a lovely time on the bus. Eventually got up to Richmond. But shortly thereafter in Richmond, the Jubilo Juggalos hunted me down again and basically ran me up and down Henrico, the main thoroughfare, until eventually I managed to get a hold of some law enforcement that would actually help me, by the way, because there was one particular undercover detective that said, "You know how much paperwork you've generated for me tonight?" all this is stuff that would, I'm thinking, who would be interested in this? I mean, all it is just Shadow of the Zodiac stuff. The stuff people are interested in are the patrons, technology that could raise a billion families out of poverty and solve world hunger and world drought, take us to the stars. That's what they're interested in. I don't feel like there's enough interest in Unity scoring, and that's why it's laid in the dustbin.
I think there's plenty of interest. I mean, you have a very full space. I think it's a riveting account of encounters between these different uh, power loci of this really complex world. But on the subject of books, actually, someone has asked me, are you also the author of this other title, Stars in Our Souls? Is that you?
No, no. If so or not, uh, published it just recently, maybe a year ago. And from 2009, Probable Pulse is the only other book. I co-authored that with my daughter.
Okay. If you wouldn't mind, if you drop those titles in the purple pill, to for reference, because there were folks asking me about what those titles were.
Oh, sure,
Sure.
sure, no problem.
So let's talk a bit about the time with Hal. I think one topic we didn't touch on too much was, if I'm not mistaken, Hal taught you to remote view. Is that right? Or around that time period is when you learned remote viewing with Hal closely?
Interestingly enough, well, whereas how brief being that lovely conversation we had in Austin, March 3rd, he already knew that I was kind of like Ingo. In other words, like he used to put it, everyone can remote view, just like everyone can play the violin. And some people are masters at it, and some people can eke out a tune. I don't know how much he knew from Kit at the time, or he certainly didn't know at that point, neither did Kit, that I had a third lobe, which appears to be an asset for enhancing many capabilities, not just RV. So in my case, actually, the first time that I RV'd, it was spontaneous and autonomous. And it was back in 1996. And I was given autonomous imagery, just like movie. And one appeared to be, as far as I could deduce, the seashore, South Africa, close to gold mines. Some very tall people and some very hairy people, short people. And then let's see, and this was before I read The War of Gods and Men, so it's unlikely there was a subconscious influence. And then it followed with a lovely flyover of the Space Needle in Seattle. And I immediately got up out of my bed, realized I'd been in some kind of hypnagogic trance, walked over to the mirror, and could not shake the undeniable feeling that something was observing me riding on the electromagnetic carrier wave of the brain, which is just basically an assemblage of like cottage cheese texture and the microtubules, which are what really gives us consciousness. Um, it's quite peculiar, actually. But yeah. RVing is something that I think is a little bit like. Have you ever watched a baby getting thrown in a bathtub, hasn't swum before, or a pool, and they just swim? 9 times out of 10, they're just swimming.
So that was your first experience with remote viewing. Felt like just kind of being thrown in the deep end.
Yeah, it was involuntary. It was someone was giving me 2 little movies and say, "Here you go. This exists. This is part of your capability." This is long before the whole ear mutilation and communication with the patrons.
Sure.
Long before that. But you see, that was the dabbling. That was natural human dabbling with Kundalini yoga. That's all that is.
I see UFO intros is up. Go ahead, Kimball.
Yeah, thanks, Missileman. This is a cool conversation to listen in on. Richard, I wanted to ask you, when a skeptic approaches you and is skeptical, what do you tell them? Like, is there something you point to, or what's your response?
You know what? I my first response is usually this. And I'd like to frame conversations I have with someone where I want them to be meaningful, but I really don't care whether or not they believe me or not. It's really not of interest to me. But I like to start conversations usually with people by letting them know that I honestly and candidly, forthrightly cannot ask anyone to believe anything that they have not seen with their own eyes, heard with their own ears. I mean, don't listen to what anyone says, not your parents, not, other than God. But don't listen to what anyone says by anything. Believe what you've seen with your own eyes or you've heard with your own ears after you've had time to think about it. So I'm not interested in convincing skeptics of anything. I know what I know. I believe what I believe. And I have seen evidence of things far beyond our ken. What's that saying that Edward de Vere, the one who really wrote the Shakespeare plays, said? Things in heaven and earth far beyond your conceptualization, Horatio. But that's what we're getting at here.
Yeah, was there a point in your life or your story where it was kind of like a turnkey, right? Where you personally for yourself became convinced of all of this stuff?
Well, I've come the full spectrum, from complete skepticism to uh, ardent acceptor. I accept. I have nothing to promulgate. I have nothing to proselytize. I have my own beliefs about my creator and my relationship with creator. But what I've seen for the ones that love us, the things that they seem to have in mind and that they're capable of are just absolutely nothing short of beautiful. I can't tell you how different my experiences have been from about 90% of the experiences in the aviary. You know about the aviary, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was the salmon. And, and
That was your code name in the aviary, the salmon?
it was just fun. I mean, basically, we were basically experiencers on the world's largest tent, referred to as, the aquarium, as a play off of aviary. The aviary was never a club. There was never a group. They didn't have group meetings. This is just a bunch of old, inactive executive spooks. They've got a piece of the pie, and they really like to see the whole pie. Now, guess what? For over 30 years, they've been talking to experiencers because they can't figure this stuff out. And the only time they get any traction is when they talk to us. They don't like what we have to say because what we have to say, I mean, I'll tell you this: if you haven't read my book, there was one thing in there that should stand out. And oh, by the way, here you go. Here's a good story. Peterson, when we were talking about the powers that be, the hidden hand, all that, I said, John, you know what the patients refer to these folks as? Uh, masters of the world versus lords of the earth. They refer to these. The whole notion of what these people have done to their own species is put in the most apparent and obvious. Uh, we couldn't be more pathetically enslaved, and this is a consciousness, probably future time travelers, that want to free us. And John Peterson, when I told him that the red shield are part of the other side of the red shield, Rothschilds, the number one of the 13 main global banking families. And I was like, I had stabbed him personally. He said, that can't be. It was the first and only time that he didn't like something that my patrons had to say. And he didn't like it vociferously. You read into that what you like, for those of us that know what the Red Shield has done to humanity. The patrons do. Painfully aware of it. I think that's what this whole intervention is all about. Are you familiar with one of the most important things that Patrick did for Ireland? I never used to like the guy until I started really delving into history. You know what? He may have messed up some of the ancient Irish culture, sure, but he freed an entire island from slavery. Slavery was an institution of fine ancient Gaelic culture. And in his lifetime, it was banished. Goodness, what if we could do that for the whole world? Obviously, someone has stood in the way of that, and it is the Red Shield. They can either work with the lords of the world, of the earth, or they will be run over by them and made irrelevant. And worse, they will be remembered as the enemies of history. That will be their legacy.
Richard, I've had a terrific question from the text of the channel. Jared Yates with Falcon Space asks, did you ever RV or physically witness any engineerable UFO technology? Any tidbits could be helpful.
Well, as a matter of fact, again, that's what the boys of Brazil were driving around in. They couldn't figure out the really good sauce either. Oh, they had been working with all kinds of gifts apparently for some time, more than just them, other Germans too. But what they found that would work here and now was PB11 IEC, inertial electrostatic confinement. That's what they powered their vehicles in the previous century.
And you think that they just solved some of the confinement problems with advanced materials, superconducting electromagnets, things of that nature to electrically stratify the plasma, prevent Brem losses from running out of control, things like that.
Correct, correct, and correct. They mastered that back in the 50s, 60s.
And
Yeah.
they did so using pieces of UFO reverse engineered technology. You think from the actual Greys?
Have you ever heard what Oberth said? He was not the only one, and there were many, both of the Germans that went to the Soviet Union and the Germans that came here. The comment was frequently made by the ones that we respect the most. We had help.
That's right. Oberth did say that. That's right. Yeah. So Lockheed's compact fusion reactor that was publicly declared as a program in Skunk Works, and then sort of quietly was defunded or something after a number of publicly successful demos. I suspected that either it went black because it went from being an IRAD to being a program, and therefore it became legitimately sapped, or it got to a point of maturity at which they realized they needed to inject some secret sauce to get it past the next hurdle. Um, what do you think of the, just comment on your take on the realm of different approaches to fusion, both hot fusion and cold fusion? What do you think is the most, other than IEC, what do you think is the most plausible? What's the best approach in your mind besides PB11 in terms of reactor architecture?
Well, I'll say this. There's uh, there's numerous places where you can identify, for example, the Department of Energy, our greatest nemesis, ones that had a witch hunt for George. Well, they are a splendid vehicle for the Zodiac. Splendid, and they're more than just a vehicle. They're an operational entity. When we first announced that we were going to help George commercialize IEC fusion, immediately DOE cut off our existing funding and gave no explanation. It took a senator and a congressman threatening to block $100 million project for this guy to come down and say, you know what, call him off. We'll start your funding again. But from that day forward, boy, anytime there was so much as a digit or something out of place, they came down like a ton of bricks and showed that they wanted to remove our pitiful, tiny budget grant from an earmark. 1.2 million, 1.3 million. So again, here you go. Same thing as when Al called me to Austin. He showed me an original letter from the Secretary of Energy Bodman. It said, and this wasn't even about IEC fusion. This was about LENR, cold fusion. And he said he begrudgingly removed 200,000. This is a guy that's responsible for budgets of billions of dollars. And he comes down and says, I begrudgingly remove this. Oh, and your honorarium 40,000 too, to add insult to injury, but I'm doing so begrudgingly. Okay. So if we're talking all the different types of fusion, we're talking hot, we're talking cold, we're talking warm. The fact of the matter is that a good German engineering staff back in the 60s probably solved all the major issues that you just mentioned for PB11 fusion, because guess what? All the various issues for traveling, both in atmosphere and outside, are best handled with 1,000 degrees versus millions of degrees. You have with millions of degrees with hot fusion. The first thing Hal ever said to me when I was in his office and he wanted to talk about George was, "This is warm fusion. It's not millions of degrees. It's 1,000 degrees. You can do PB11, I believe, at around 900 degrees, and you could do HE3 at about 1,000 degrees."
But he was speaking of in George's gasified Leonard setups, right?
Right, that letter specifically was about LENR, so they were threatened by that as well. But the witch hunt for IEC for George started with oh shoot, who was that fellow? His name escapes me. He was part of the same laboratory group. He was just as big an IEC proponent,
right,
as George, and then he became the DOE's #1 gatekeeper to make sure no funding went to IEC fusion. No funding for warm fusion. It's impossible.
Well,
can't happen.
Yeah. So the thing that I want to clear up is that there's been a certain amount of erroneous technical information propagated by Ashton Forbes about the nature of IEC PB11 fusion, and he calls it cool fusion. And where he's either mistaken or deliberately obfuscating is the notion that an aneutronic reaction doesn't generate a bunch of neutrons magically makes it cool, which is not the case at all. The notion of hot versus cold fusion is the initial conditions you have to instantiate to get it to fuse. It's the fact that the IEC cathode inside the reactor is using gigantic electrostatic fields. We're talking mega amps, right? It's like 200 keV plasma, and one EV is 14,000 degrees Kelvin. So it's
There you go.
yeah, it's a billion degrees Kelvin in terms of pure ions colliding with one another, and you're still smashing them together to overcome Coulombic repulsion. And so that's still a hot fusion reaction, contrary to what Ashton has been telling people. And I think he's doing that because he's probably realizing that if he says that UFOs are powered by hot fusion reactors, that's not going to sound very sexy. That's going to be like, wait, are you retarded? Are you kidding? That from the 50s, that kind of stuff. So it has to sound kind of exotic. And so he has to blend it with Leonard or cold fusion. It's nothing to do with that, right? It's not.
That's exactly my observation too.
Right.
That's exactly what he's doing. What a shame.
Now, that's not to say that you can't, because the other thing that's not being made clear, in I'm glad he's bringing attention to IEC fusion and to PB11, but the other thing that's not being made clear is the fact that PB11 is a fuel cycle, IEC is a reactor architecture. So you can mix and match reactor architectures and fuel cycles, generally speaking, depending. I mean, you might have a solid target of boron that you're shooting, hydrogen ions at or something like that if you're doing ICF. But um, the interesting question that I haven't heard too many people talk about is PB11 lattice fusion, and the notion of trying to do cold fusion in a lattice with PB11 with a solid boron target moving hydrogen through there. Have you seen much to do with that, Leonard mixing PB11?
Not anywhere near enough, which tells me something.
Yeah.
We've had several discussions about this, and the more I look and the less I find, the more interested I am to run these experiments, some of those experiments.
Yeah. So the MIT group, I mentioned to you a couple years ago, DOE did actually give out a really paltry amount of money for Leonard, something like 12 or 13 million dollars to 7 or 8 different institutions, $1.5 million a piece or something like that. And MIT's group, led by Peter Hagelstein. Hagelstein, of course, was a protege of Schwinger, Julian Schwinger, who shared a Nobel Prize with Richard Feynman. And they were advocates of cold fusion towards the end of Schwinger's life. And Hagelstein, I think, is quite senior at this point as well, in his mid 70s or so. And Hagelstein has got a model for Leonard that he believes is an adequate physical description, which I think will upset a lot of Leonard people because it doesn't actually describe new physics. It's completely from quantum field theory, and it makes the argument that you can jump fusion rates by about 40 orders of magnitude using quantum tunneling in the lattice, and that paper is public now.
Oh, really? All right, we need to move quick.
Yeah, so keep an eye out for, if you're interested in Leonard out there. MIT's got some publications coming out where they have reproduced some reference experiments of some effects, and look, I don't know what the results are yet, but when they publish, it'll be interesting to see which ones they find to be reproducible.
Well, if it's got legs, we'll put feet on it, and then some shoes.
I got Juan Ferrier requesting to come up, so let me bring him up.
Oh, Juan! Hey, Juan! How are you, sir?
Hey, Richard. Hey, gang. How's it going?
Good, man. Thanks for joining us.
I heard some quantum tunneling, so I just wanted to ask if you guys are familiar with who's leading the research in quantum tunneling in modern times, or who pioneered that.
Go ahead, Jack.
Gosh, I don't know if I know the answer to who actually pioneered research into quantum tunneling. There might not be one name because, I mean, quantum superposition, I think, came out of Einstein. Uh, I think that was actually a contribution of his to quantum field theory, which was rare. He didn't do much with quantum field theory. He really hated it. But the reason I'd say that there's probably not one name is that quantum tunneling manifests itself in so many different ways. I mean, you see it. You see electrons jump potential wells probabilistically in semiconductors and things like that. And so it's not always super exotic. I mean, so when you study just undergraduate quantum mechanics, they will teach you that, as a matter of fact, the daughter product creation for alpha particle radiation. So the to compute the rate of alpha particle generation from a radioactive uranium nucleus, you have to take into account quantum tunneling, because there is some probability that alpha particles will actually jump the potential well and leave the uranium nucleus when they don't technically have the energy to do so, because of course it's not a sharp square well, it's a rounded well. So anyway, that's what I know about it, but I don't know who could be credited with being the father of it,
or who's doing the leading research right now. I will say this, that without telling too many tales out of school, I have a very dear friend that would very much love to do a quantum tunneling experiment for about $2 billion, because there's a suspicion that it could lead to traversable wormhole. Now, the reason I bring this up is because if you recall, if you haven't read my book, there's a part where, you know, when Hal and John, second time we were at Arlington Institute, when we were really rolling up our sleeves and getting down to work, the first thing happened was, you know, John was off making some copies of something, and Hal flops a document in front of me. It was Dr. Eric Davis's um, seminal, unclassified study on FTL make or break through issues. And Hal summarized it all very nicely in just one simple paragraph. Warp drive, not in my time, not in your time, probably not in your daughter's time, maybe not in her daughter's time, maybe never, but wormhole. But wormhole. But wormhole. Well, Dr. Davis outlines in that paper the basic concept of traversable wormhole that covers the initial issues that are basically what you've got is three sets of issues. One is the location of these nanite-sized wormholes that open all around us, thousands upon thousands every minute, open for a nanosecond, back again, gone. To locate them, to stabilize and hold them, and then the third set of issues, blow a ton of energy in the right way into it. And then you get presented with the subsequent three sets of issues: how to control where you go in the wormhole, how to keep it from spitting you out while it crushes you, the means to create the effective force field of the mechanism being used to traverse the wormhole, and then, most importantly, how to keep that wormhole not just from collapsing on you, but to keep it traversable while you explore wherever you're exploring on the other side of the wormhole. And the thing to remember is this: it's not like, here's the opening, here's your closing. Probably every wormhole is different, like a snowflake. And I'm not just talking about the nano-sized, wormholes that appear in a nanosecond, but bottom line is this: Eric Davis outlined it very nicely. And since then, there have been several people, one particularly promising Portuguese scientist, who many people know, has proposed a way to keep the wormhole traversable while you move through it. It's the equivalent of creating kind of force field like a slug to force your way into the wormhole, keep it open, and keep it open while you're through it. Doesn't answer the question of how you keep it open and reactivate it when you need to go back through. But, you know, $2 billion would probably get us a good ways in that direction.
I don't think we need that much money for the experimentation, but look into Dr. Raymond Chow, who's currently working with us at Texas Space. And I think he's one of the early pioneers of the quantum tunneling
Yes, he is.
effect. And, yep. And the subject matter expert, I think, in it, leading for now. But
Yes, he
Richard,
is.
excellent info. I'm going to shut up now and we can sidebar after you're done.
Oh, good, good. I hope we do, because I really appreciate the development that happened earlier today. I appreciate you, Juan.
Likewise. Thanks for everything.
Yeah,
You're
hey,
so
thanks,
welcome.
Juan. Before we go on to further questions, I wanted to invite you, Richard, to your level of comfort. Do you want to tell the story of how you were introduced to Eric Davis and your interactions on the technical content?
Well, yeah, sure. You know, basically, Eric is, you know, the second in command over there at the Institute for Advanced Studies, and um, Eric and I didn't really start having any long, serious conversations until, excuse me, until. Do you remember the 100-year Starship DARPA program?
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a good conversation that night, Jack. I had another good conversation with Eric about the same weight, covering the same topics. And what was interesting to me was that I really took the time to listen, not to what Eric was always saying, although I did listen carefully to the content, but listen to what he was saying, because I felt someday someone would ask me an important question, and I would be required to offer my opinion. And someone did ask my opinion. And, I don't think Dr. Davis is a Zodiac asset. I don't think he is. If he is, he's a unique form of controlled opposition with such a long running game plan that I wouldn't hazard a guess at what the powers that be would like to utilize him for eventually. I suspect that Eric is an honest man that um, has suffered some interesting things. You know that he was at Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah.
He was the guy that had the voice in his head telling them to get out or their heads would be ripped off. But the thing I really respect about Eric is that in spite of those traumatic experiences with the phenomenon, he persists like a bulldog. I really appreciate that about him. His scientific rigor, of course, is extraordinary, or he wouldn't be second in command and a trusted associate of Hal's. I think Eric is pointed the way in every possible way that he can for the paths that we can take if we can't get the stuff out of the black box, out of a black box, out of a black box. Eric is pointing the way.
Yeah, as you know, I had that conversation with him at Soul too, and off camera we talked about the status of fusion research and the status of like his take on torsion, and of course I've mentioned the breakthrough physics propulsion book, Frontiers of Space Propulsion, Frontiers of Propulsion Science, which has anybody who wants to basically take it upon themselves to study the past attempts made with rigor by institutions or PhDs or funded efforts that are documented. That book is basically a bible for how far things got from essentially the 40s until 2005, at least those things that are publicly available. And so it's a nice place to organize your thoughts and to start lining things out and ruling things out, and then focusing on the things that have not been entirely dismissed yet. It's a really valuable resource in that regard.
Yeah, I think Eric is one of us. I don't know why someone in the aviary wanted to try to figure out if he was a Zodiac asset or not, but I don't think he is. I think he is on the right side, and I think he's doing as much as he can, knowing that, hijacked, basically, between an army of lawyers and an army of assassins. Eric's a hero.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Alan, or Alien.
Alien Light.
Unmute
Thank
your
you,
speaker.
Alien. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Alien Light scientists, physicists, quantum physics, consciousness. We're posting it right now, confirmed by AI, Chat GPT, really extensive probing in the color spectrum. Anyone know of a potential hydrogen color that you're swimming in right now? The color and potential hydrogen vertical signal that we're swimming in? Anyone know of evidence of it?
Continue. Clarify.
Completely unknown. Look at the videos. I'm posting a video right now. It's a live video, potential hydrogen suspended in air. Never seen before. Where we're trying to reach news scientists, news. I'm trying to reach news. They don't want to seem to be, even though it's quantum physics confirmed, AI confirmed, the probe went in there, confirmed the color spectrum. It is potential hydrogen in the color spectrum, rotation of the color of Earth, unknown. We're trying to reach news to go viral with the discovery. It's confirmed.
I see. You're talking about new hydrogen emission lines. This actually kind of reminds me of the hydrino blacklight power type of deal.
Yeah.
To tag it on to hydrino blacklight power, as far as I understand it, that theory creates some problems. It violates energy conservation, and it has some problems with just basic Dirac equations and things. But I'm kind of a stickler for
I'm
mathematical
sorry.
consistency.
I'm sorry. This color spectrum that I'm referring to, you are connected to right now. It's your pH, right? It's the color pH. You're in the narrow range of it, which is the green, right? Which is your millivoltage. It's a measurement of millivoltage. Potential hydrogen is a measurement of millivoltage voltage in a liquid solution, right? So we're talking about your electrical energy, but it's not only that. Potential hydrogen is everything. But what we're trying to say, an alien light has evidence confirmed by Chat GPT AI, confirmed, is that you're swimming in this light right now. It's a vertical potential hydrogen color spectrum, unknown. And AI, we're extensively researched to see if it's a known particle. It is a particle that exists, but it's unknown to scientists.
Okay, we'll
And
take a
that's
look
why
at the videos. Thanks, Alien. Appreciate it.
yeah, when we speak of something of consciousness right now, this is what I expect. People like you, brushing it away. You don't want to know about something that exists right now. You want to talk about hypothetical science, but science that's happening right now that affects your life right now. You don't have understanding of it. Thank you so much. Look at it. If you want to connect with reality, look at the images we're posting. This is conscious quantum physics right now in the color spectrum.
Okay.
If you don't understand colors, then you don't understand anything. You're just programmed to be in the past. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
So just before you respond to that, Jack, I want to say that if Alien Light would want to DM me a link to whatever it is that he is working on, uh, absolutely. It's just like when Jim Woolsey winked at me and said, "Black Light Power," check them out. We can't shut anyone down until we take a look at what actual science. We don't care about white papers. We don't care about theories. We care about actual results. So if someone's getting actual results with something and something isn't jiving with the rest of our science, I suggest to you, Jack, that is pointing right to that huge gulf that Hal and others have talked about between the advanced science in the special quarters and the science that we're all dealing with right now. That gulf right there.
Sure. And I do think each of those propositions is worth looking at to its appropriate level of rigor. But you're a gentleman and a scholar, and I salute you for your patience. I've got Andrew Cote up here, good friend of mine, behind
Oh,
the
Andrew.
Hyperstition
Yeah.
LLC organization. Welcome, Andrew. Thanks for coming up.
Hey, what's up, guys? Good to be here.
Good to hear from you, Andrew.
Thanks. Yeah. So, for folks who don't know me, I'm sort of more of an engineer that's worked in applied physics research in the past in biotech and fusion energy. And yeah, these days I mostly produce this conference called Deep Tech Week, but very much interested in this kind of stuff. The one thing I feel very confident of, any which way you slice it, is that there's been a lot of intentionally covered up, suppressed past history of research into the cool stuff that probably would make life a lot better for a lot of people. And it seems like the topic in the UAP world is just this sea of misinformation and disinformation, and it's so intentional and malicious. But it's sort of a big thing, and people kind of have the right to know. But so it's I think we're kind of all in this Earth realm, and the name of the game is discernment and how to figure out truth from falsehood, I guess. Anyway, I don't know what you guys are talking about. I'm just dropping in.
Actually, you know what? I'm glad you said something along those lines, Andrew, because something that's worth considering is this: what you just said has had a response. Okay, the response in terms of what we can do, and when I say we, I am talking about the consortium of mad scientists that we've been building for 20 years. These are all scientists that see the same thing that you're talking about. They're thinking through the same things that they've had to think through. What happened in their career? Certain technological decisions were properly made, and there are close to 300 of us. We want to change the world for the better because someone made us change it for the worse. Now we want to make it better, and we know we can. And we know it's either now or never, because I'm the youngest amongst all of us, probably. The oldest of us is probably 101. I think the average age is 84. This is our last chance to make some things right that we wish we could have made right. You won't find any webpage about us, but we have been quietly organizing.
And are you guys bound by signed sort of like legal measures preventing, I guess, disclosure of, I guess, patents or ideas or this kind of stuff?
I'll just say this. Some people have left some of the major contractors with golden parachutes. Okay, some inventors have been able to leave with not just their patents, but some. So it's in terms of looking at intellectual property. If someone said this is pie in the sky, raise 1 billion families out of slavery, out of poverty, and send their kids to start, this is pie in the sky. How could you possibly pull off something like that? Well, actually, we know exactly how we would, and none of it involves alien recovered technology. It involves all technologies that we've been working with for the last couple of years that the government simply doesn't want out there, and the Zodiac will do its best to keep from getting out there.
Yeah, it always seems sort of hard to believe that there's not just one person who is on their deathbed and breaks ranks and dead man switches some designs, some documents online in such a manner as to put it in the hands of a research laboratory or applied physics laboratory, or just once. It's one of these things where it's like, if there was, like, this is now my skeptical side coming in, but if there was this technology that could liberate humanity from energy scarcity permanently, or suddenly get us to the stars, like the sort of it assumes a and I mean, I'm not ruling this out, but basically a supernatural level of control and suppression, and from what I've understood, I mean, if go with the narratives that sort of Tesla invented this stuff in the 30s or 20s, or Wardenclyffe or whatever, that kind of narrative around the missing patents and the missing Tesla trunks, and then Donald Trump's uncle or whatever. You think that would be like
Andrew? I don't want to, but I got to ask
rediscovered
you.
again and again and again.
You're making me wonder something. Are you familiar with who Tesla's business manager was? What his name was?
Yeah, no, I'm familiar with that.
Tesla's business manager. His name was George Scherf. George Scherf. He was a member of the Third Reich. He was here to raid the intellectual property of Tesla. His son, George Scherf Jr., is the fellow referred to as Curious George in those children's books. Curious George was always mucking up Nikolai's experiments, messing him up, and his father made sure that Tesla died a pauper The Third Reich did quite a number on him, and all part of the plan for the Fourth Reich. Scorzini
I do
spoke of it
wonder though
extensively.
about, I do wonder though, Andrew, about how there's never been a document drop. I mean, but then again, there sort of has and sort of hasn't. I think le- the inability to attribute leaks with authenticity makes it really hard to say, oh, there haven't been leaks or there haven't been document drops, because there's a lot of noise in the line as well. So it's really hard to pick out the signal from the noise and say that, oh, this was an authentic leak versus a bullshit MJ12 document or something.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
true. That's true.
You just think that, like, if these programs had hundreds of people work on them, and they were in the 40s and 50s, now a lot of those people would either be dead or close to death. Where's the hey everyone, here's this thing, go build it yourself, kind of thing, right? And then a lot of
Yeah.
CIA declassified documents also, like, they seem like intentional misinformation type stuff. I read this last document recently, and this is still going on. This was published 2025. It was four national intelligence security former folks that are now moved into private industry, talking about the potential applications of scalar energy technology. And then one of the images they had in there was like a supposed aerial photo of this whatever sort of Tesla mortar thing the Soviet Union developed. And then you could find that same image online, but it was just an artist's conception. And so it's like that whole scalar wave tech that Maxwell's equations had a missing scalar component, and here's a bunch of fudged math that isn't really actually solid. And that's still being put out there by people as recently as 1 year ago. And it's just like, why? Like, is this to throw smoke screens up for China and Russia so they follow blind alleys or something?
You want to take that, Richard? I have a thought, but go ahead.
Well, it makes me think that people don't seem to realize just how extensive the control system is. I'm going to tell you a story. You're not going to think it's related at all, but I want you to understand this goes back to something I said earlier that probably sounded pretty flippant, and it wasn't at all. So as it turns out, I think I referred earlier to a mentor, Gerald Muller Wilson, who was the son of aide de camp to MacArthur. He told me many marvelous stories while he was training me in old spycraft, and one of them has stayed with me to this day. And that's that when his father happened to have been in Paris before the war, he discovered 3 Chinese nationals in a Paris coffee house that are very well known to us today. Mao, Deng Xiaoping, and I always forget the third one. And they were there basically serving up coffee during the day in this Parisian coffee house. And at night, they're going downstairs, receiving plans, making sure that certain money's moved, typing up manifestos. The basement was a full operation. They were preparing. The Fourth Reich was preparing them to create China, to use the Han ethnicity to forge together all these Chinese ethnicities. They will be a useful tool for racketeering the Pentagon. I'll never forget the last time I was at the Pentagon with my father, and we just looked around, and he said, "What is going on here? Everywhere, Chinese nationals, everywhere throughout the Pentagon." You see what I'm getting at? The Fourth Reich uses the Zodiac, Fourth Reich, etc., uses people to do things and make the changes they want with the world. And it's getting harder and harder now. They're getting more desperate. Food for thought.
I would say to the question of questionable, technically questionable documents, like the scalar document, things like that. You know, there are like at least 3, if not 4, buckets of UFO adjacent or exotic physics adjacent technical content that get produced and distributed. There's deliberately misleading counterintelligence type of stuff that's created intentionally to confuse the situation, confuse the conversation, deliberately false information, technical information, false leaks. And then there is uh, independent actors that are not read in and are trying to suss out from the outside what's going on, and they're just wrong. And they're producing, and they're confident, and they think they've got it, and they've got all this material, and they think they're onto something, and it's just incorrect.
It's like Gordon
And then
Cooper.
there's
Uh,
yeah,
or I'm
and
sorry,
then there's people on
Gordon
the
Novell. Not Gordon Cooper. I'm sorry, the astronaut. Gordon Novell.
yeah.
Did you ever
And then
talk
there's
to
people
him?
on the outside producing authentic information that is rigorous, and then there's people on the inside leaking authentic information.
Right.
And it's a soup. And I think it's very tenuous to tell the difference, because the people on the inside leaking authentic information, that is the degree of rigor is dependent on how successful they've even been. And I'm of the opinion they probably have only been moderately successful, if that. And so some of it could be wrong by accident. I think that's why it's a soup.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. The we all know that the best counterintelligence agents, operatives, not assets, are going about crafting the narrative to fit with the larger narrative. There's always going to be one gem that you'll find, and once you find it, like, oh shoot, I already knew that, but it was cloaked in all this other stuff. And guess what? It wasted your time. It wasted your resources. It is obfuscation. It is part of why we were told long ago that the CIA's mission will be successful if everyone is utterly confused. Well, then you get these people like Gordon Novell, hawking uh, alien ARV recovered vehicles and offering to tell you about the deep black secrets. Oh my lord! Um, when Hal and John found out I actually had talked to Gordon once, they're like, "Don't talk to him ever again." He was a very useful tool. I mean, you could go back to the whole ethic and notion of how Jesus James Angleton used to work. He was perfect. Gordon Novell. There have been many. They waste their time and their resources.
Looks like Electron's back with another hand. Go ahead.
Yes, hey everyone. Once again, great conversations. I had my hand up because kind of what Andrew was talking about. I wanted to make a comment and kind of get what he thinks and what Richard believes. But it was regarding your comment, Andrew, on technological process. I do believe that. So I work in technology. I work in cybersecurity, and it is increasingly apparent that civilization, humanity, we are facing a paradox where, despite the technological process that we've made, we've been unable to rebuild or maintain the complex systems of the past. And a lot of these engineers have died without passing on that information. So there's the brain drain component, right, where engineers, researchers, skilled experts, rather than staying in those industries, they perhaps shift into more lucrative or less risky fields, right, like fintech as an example, or consulting. But I also believe, Andrew, to your point, that there is a stifled approach to some research and innovation. And I think that the both of them can be existing at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive. And I think when you look at the consequences of that, it basically paints a picture of our modern society, and maybe that that fork in the road that Richard, you were talking about, where, you know, are we going to reconcile the issues of the past, or are we going to build towards a progress of the future?
You build on the progress of future with the notion, and you build it right, and you build it with compassion, and you build it in a way to benefit all. When you're doing that, then you're on the right path. But if you're doing it for any other reason, you will be subject to all kinds of issues. We are moving into an area right now where innovation has to be leased from its chains. I mean, we see it everywhere, and we know why. And we know why. We know who's doing it. We follow the money. We can establish it. Let me ask you something, Electron. If you had your way, how would you see all this panning out?
Could you elaborate, please?
What would be the most amazing scenario that could pan out for the benefit of the human species for innovation? What does that look like?
I can give it.
So that's, yes, that's kind of where I was going, is that I believe that with today's technological civilization, that technology still remains a tool. I am an accelerationist at heart, but there needs to be guardrails. But I think if, as a technologist, or, you know, someone that is interested in the preservation of society and knowledge, I think resiliency and building resilient systems for long-term progress. And I think that with resiliency, that you can implement that into large-scale problem solving. And when you look at systems of the past, that resiliency isn't necessarily a primal focus. And I think we need to change that primary focus on critical infrastructure, as an example. So I think resiliency is kind of what I would focus on, and is what I'm focused on now.
All right, let me
Wow,
take
I like that.
let me take a swing at that question, because I think about this a lot. I think of the full extent of the crimes against humanity that have been perpetrated in the name of national security or the interest of a select few. I think if the full extent of those crimes came to public light all at once, you would see essentially a complete breakdown of civil society and social order, and that this would be to the massive detriment of people that are alive today. So I don't, but that's what you want.
Do you really
want
believe
to
that,
meet-
Andrew? Do you really believe that? There have been some
I think
great think
politicians
tanks that
would
have
be
said that.
strung up by the lampposts. I think we would not have any trust in the federal government. I think the United States would probably dissolve. I think you'd have states that break away. Yeah, 100%.
With the disclosure of the full truth, you mean?
Yeah, the full truth. Everything that's been going on all throughout the last 100 years or more, collusion with other governments of other countries, and what they've done to the American population and the population of the world as a whole. Even small things like all these wars on false pretenses, and you know, what's the real story behind these wars of aggression and resource control, let alone experimental testing programs and genetic manipulation. And some of those have come to light. The Tuskegee syphilis experiments, you know, dropping fungal spores into the New York subway line. All, like, even those things, MK Ultra, all these were conspiracy theories for a long time. They've all come to light, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. I think if you stack up those crimes along with, you know, the accelerationist manifesto is essentially the opportunity cost of delayed technological progress is measured in human suffering. So if you stack up the actual crimes committed along with the opportunity cost of abundance and flourishing from having suppressed technologies that could liberate us from scarcity, I think we'd say, yeah, the CIA and the U.S. government have committed unspeakable acts of evil in the name of their own self-interest and under the guise of national security, and we should dismantle them. And you have breakaway states and all this kind of stuff. I think that's actually not what you want. I think by the time the truth comes out, we will have to evolve as a civilization to the point that we can have forgiveness and then learn to move on from it. And I think that is how things are unwinding, actually. And I don't think you'll see these. You know, what you want is the public trial, is the full exposure, but you're not going to get it. And I think you got to let go of that. And I think you want continuity of civilization, and perhaps you can use AI or super AI as some kind of guise to say, oh, look, this AI has cracked this long-standing problem, and now we have this miracle new technology, even though perhaps that had been discovered decades ago. So yeah, I think the continuity and forgiveness, you know, the higher level of conscious awareness is to forgive sins of the past and to turn the other cheek. And that was the message of Jesus, not to meet an eye for an eye, despite that's maybe what we want.
Well, okay. You know, yes, you're correct. An eye for an eye leaves the whole universe blind. But he also overturned a money changer's table to make a statement about usury. And usury is only one of the many aspects of greed. You know, I happen to side with the notion that you can actually sort all things before you into two categories. One category, are you denying the right of another living thing to thrive? Or two, are you treating someone else as you would wish to be treated? All sins, all virtues come from those two things. Are you causing another living thing not to be able to thrive? Or are you helping it to thrive? Are you treating it as you would treat yourself? Because that was part of the message of the master. We are all connected. What harms one,
Yes,
harms another.
I agree, but my point that I originally brought up is that, and I kind of want to get your answer, and neither of you have really answered my question, but I believe that the current brain drain and the stifled research that leads to the post-scarcity world being less likely. And the reason I bring up resilience is that, you know, post-scarcity, in my mind, how I define it, that isn't just about creating abundance. It's about sustaining abundance or sustaining civilization in the face of those inevitable disruptions. And without the resiliency in our systems, in our institutions, post-scarcity, with all the technological advancement, that is still a temporary condition. And I believe with the continuity of civilization example that you brought up, Andrew, you know, it is definable, but it's not yet part of our foundation for what a civilization means. And currently, civilization is really only able to absorb a certain level or a certain amount of shocks to the system core before it basically crumbles. And I guess I wanted to get both of your opinion on what does that look like, in your opinion, from maybe a technological standpoint, or you know, Richard, from your background, like what does that look like sustaining post-scarcity despite inevitable disruptions?
I think that disruptions create lessons learned that are valuable, as long as we maintain a methodology to keep them as road bumps. I think I'm totally sold on this notion of resiliency being required to bring about a new environment for innovation. And the thing that did you ever hear of a story called The Education of the Cameroy? the education of the Cameroy, was about a PTA group, Parent Teacher Association group, that leaves the Earth and goes to visit the planet Cameroy and to see what their education system is like. And there's several hallmarks. There's at least one negative issue, but the hallmarks to me are the ones I like to focus on, and that is that any Cameroonian is given the capability and training, intellectual rigor to be able to do any job. By the time they're in high school, their final high school project, we know what the impact has been on innovation and education as a result of the Rockefellers. Just at some point, I have to say that when we discuss these things, I feel like we are all very much on the same page, but we're all quibbling about the dissolution of slavery. I mean, that is what we're talking about. You want to bring innovation back. You want to bring resiliency back. You want to bring mentorship back. We need to talk about that. And it's just that simple. It just needs to end. Innovation, once people are no longer bullied, threatened, harassed, intimidated, sucked dry, innovation returns naturally. Resiliency, though, Electron, you're right, we'll keep it.
I've had a couple of new speakers join the panel. Looks like Grider's up and Andrew's back. Go ahead, Grider.
Hey, Jack, can I have 5 more minutes and then I'll be ready to ask my question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Richard, I had a question over text about DUMBs. Now, we spoke briefly on your discussion of the potential underground detonations in Denver and Virginia in I think 2015 or 2010. But do you have any other comments or opinions about either deep underground military bases operated directly by the U.S. military or proxy facilities or NHI facilities operated by other entities in the form of a deep underground military base?
I'll start by sharing one of the first questions that Hal wanted to ask me after we gotten over introductions in our second face-to-face meeting. We were there with John Peterson, so obviously, but House was extremely eager. One of the first things he wanted to ask when he apparently finally realized there were enough things here that indicated to him there was something going on. He said, I really want you to tell me what the patrons think about the DUMBs, the deep underground military bunkers. Are you familiar with them? And I tell you what I froze up like a deer in the headlights because I was not that long from a boatload of downloads from the patrons that I'd kind of, put it aside like all the other crazy stuff they told me. But the deep underground military bunkers, the reason why I was deer in the headlights is because I could immediately feel the tension with my patrons who were present because it's a full body experience when they were there. Like I said, the carrying, the first time the autonomous, the involuntary RVing, they were showing me how it was done. And when I was experiencing that in that moment, I realized the utter terror of wanting so desperately to tell how all the amazing things I had heard from about DUMBs. Realizing though the tension because they were clearly not wanting me to talk a whole hell of a lot about certain things they talked about in front of John Peterson. So I made eye contact with Hal and I said, death. Death is what the patients know about the dumps. And horrible, horrible terror. A program vast and wide, made by children who have disappointed their mentors. They are making their tombs, and they will not be safe in them.
And this was, as much as anything, a way to avoid saying something else in front of Peterson. I take it.
Oh boy, the patients told me a whole lot more about them. They told me about the twin capital cities, about the various capabilities of moving underneath the earth between the continents. It is extraordinary what the Fourth Reich has done in 80 years. I mean, hate them if you must, for obvious reasons. They killed my father. But you can admire what they have built and admire the strength and fortitude of whoever struck back and devastated both their capital cities. Oh, the patients told me all kinds of things about the building of these things. The Fourth Reich's greatest project, the way to ensure legacy and make sure that they will determine who will control the Fifth Reich. The dumbs are what they hope will be quarters for their operation in the stars. And like I said before, you want to go to a dumb, you can find one in Wildcat Ridge. That's a very unique one too. I think that's the one where they'll take Big Daddy Z if they have to.
All right, I think Grider's good to go. Go ahead, Grider.
Yeah, hey Richard, thanks for letting us ask all these questions, man. I really appreciate it. My question is about John Peterson. John Peterson, he had a think tank, right, called the Arlington Institute. And my understanding is, like, from what I can recall, he created a database for like anomalous dream premonitions and cataclysmic events, and that was a big thing back in like the mid 2000s. Do you know if you know what exactly happened with that? Like, what was the results of that? Clearly, there wasn't anything super catastrophic that that was in the database that ended up coming to fruition. But do you know if there's any think tanks that are still doing that type of work, or anybody that you're aware of that is creating, that is putting those types of events or those types of premonitions into databases? Do you have any idea?
I not much, and I doubt it. And I'll be real candid with you. More than once, John took something that I told him or gave him and used it in interviews as if it was his own. He also was fond of saying, "Why do you believe and trust Dr. David Martin? His company will always be a privately held company because 30% of the work is with the NSA. Why do you believe David Martin?" David Martin came up to give a presentation at the Arlington Institute in Berkeley Springs. And David doesn't seem to care that John says to everyone that he can, "Why do you listen to David? He lies, he lies, and he lies, and he lies. He's constantly lying." Remember, this is the same guy that was defending the number one globalist banker family that's put us in the situation that we're in. Do you see where I'm going with all this? John is not a good guy. And I watched over the years as this Arlington Institute shrunk, and shrunk. Because all he does is steal other people's ideas, and people are now onto it. He is a paltry futurist at best. And it's a shame because, I don't know who he stole the dream idea from, analyzing dreams to find prophetic content. Excellent idea. Should have been funded. He might have funded that sort of thing if I'd given him a winning lottery ticket number, but I'm sorry. I'm not going to give Satan what he wants just because he wants it and he thinks he knows what he's going to do with the money. Greed is what's put us in this situation. John Peterson is a personification of greed. Sorry. Wish I had something better to say.
No, I mean, that was great. Thank you. What's your opinions on Richard Doty?
I was with I was having dinner with she used to go by the name Karen Anscombe back then, and a fellow by the name of Chicken Little, from the aviary. You have you ever heard Chicken Little? He's a member of the Bush family, i.e. the Scherf family. And I was having dinner with them, and they told me they were really disappointed. They didn't want to talk to Rick. They had a point with him, and he never showed up. Totally blew him off. What was odd about this, and the reason why I bring it up is because, all due respect to Rick Doty, but he's not that good at counter-intel agents in any way, shape, or form because he's one of the sloppiest coin-intel pros I've ever met. I mean, I've never met him. Everything I know is secondhand. But what was interesting to me is in that dinner, when Chicken Little was talking disappointed that he was, there was an actual bizarre lapse of time, missing time, later discussed. We have a suspicion that Chicken Little, once in a while, experiments with a few little gadgets that he pilfers out of the Zodiac lab. We suspect, many of us suspect, based on several incidences, not just that one, that he's playing with psychotronic advanced technologies. And at least he was then, giving people memory losses, all that, crazy Men in Black kind of crap. Yeah, they followed him around like the little eschatological meat puppet he is. He's not on our side. He's not on the side of the human race. That's for sure. He's part of the Pentagon, that sickness that's infected for a long time. Not just John Pearson, but many others. There's a reason why they made some bad decisions on our behalf.
Great questions. I'm going to throw up a 15-minute warning and let everyone know we'll be closing out at about, looks like midnight Eastern, I think that is. So any final questions, final subject matter, please throw an invite or a request to speak up, and we'll bring you up to the panel. Thanks.
Yeah, I got time for one more question before I got to drink my cocoa and go to bed.
Yeah, sounds good, Richard. Andrew's got his hand up. Go ahead, bud.
Hey, dude. Yeah, really curious about this deep underground military base topic. You kind of alluded to a lot of things there, but then didn't actually elaborate on them. I saw this thing recently that was like saying there was like $21 trillion of misallocated funds or unaccounted for funds or stuff like that on Tucker Carlson. Can you elaborate on this whole deep underground military base thing, the extent, scale, size, if there's like any actual hard evidence? Is it all just rumors and received messages?
So, are you familiar with the problem with the Pentagon's budget that was going to be announced on 9/11 in 2001 by Donald Rumsfeld? It was a
The part of the Pentagon that was there's something underway or something like that.
it was a substantial figure, and yet it's rather small compared to the figures that are off the budget of the United States and on someone else's budget. Even more money has been spent. The Fourth Reich has spared no expense to build this incredible complex around the world under the ground. They fostered many different funding sources including the heroin trade out of Asia. They continued the same policies as the previous empire that had been there. Do you see what I'm getting at?
I guess so. I guess I'm just looking for more like sort of information I can go and educate myself.
Come again?
Looking for more like information to educate myself in this topic, I guess.
I'm sorry, Andrew. We're having a hard time understanding you. There's a lot of noise in the line.
Yeah, I don't think you got a clean connection. You there, Andrew? Or we lose you?
Yeah, it's just windy. Yeah, I'm just looking for more places I can go read. If you guys have like these documents or good source information on that topic.
All I'll say
Well, I'll
is
tell you what. I'll tell you.
UAP Gerb's got a really great documentary up that he generated a little while ago. I haven't actually watched it myself, but his content's usually pretty well researched. So I would imagine it would probably be fairly well annotated, but that's all I have.
How about this? You know what? That's a good one. But let me give you an oldie so you could put with that, a Goldie oldie. My OSS mentor, well, the one book that he recommended and absolutely wanted me to read, not once, not twice, but 3 times, was The Morning of the Magicians. Morning of the Morning of the Magicians. You will see how old some of these problems are. And much of the stuff is not contemporary. Anyhow, that's my recommendation.
All right, Richard, what do you think? One more question, or you heading out?
I think it's time for my cocoa, but I will say this. You know, if you're trying to read stuff about the Zodiac, I don't know who else is talking about them. Because dead men tell no secrets. So if you find something about the Zodiac, the master cult, whether it's going by that name or another name, I'd love to hear. I'd love to hear, because that's just a hobby, which I don't allow to affect my professional life.
Well, I think you got to get part 2 out here. You know, if it's going to be Unity scorned or Unity continuum.
Unity misplaced.
Yeah, Unity discarded.
Unity disguised.
That's even better. I like that one.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, that's not bad. Maybe we'll go with that. Listen, Jack, I want to thank you so much for the opportunity, because, it's all about warning the other rabbits in the warren right
Yeah.
now. So thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Richard. And as a quick epilogue, I was informed that Ashton Forbes was notified of our earlier comments about PB11 and IEC and LANR fusion, and decided to come in and listen for a little while. I invited him up. I used the logic and sent him a request. He ignored it. I received a request through one of his proxies to please verbally invite him to the panel. I was going to, but I wasn't going to interrupt my speaker, and he decided to leave. So if he'd like to join us again sometime, he's more than welcome to join the panel, and we'll have a cordial scientific discussion.
Yes, and let's keep it scientific with that one.
Try as we may. All right. Well, thank you to our.
We do what we can with what we have.
Thank you to the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you to everyone who joined in. I'm going to go into the archive and try to rescue this audio and get it posted either SoundCloud or YouTube or something like that. I know that a lot of people came in late. We went for almost 4 hours. So thank you again, and hope you have a good night. Join me again next time. Thanks.
May you be yourself.